Thank you for joining Wars of the Roses. As we continue with Part 10, Analysis of Freemasonry, in which the symbols and original intention of the institution are explained, from an exposition of the mysteries or religious dogmas and customs of the ancient Egyptians, Pythagoreans and Druids, also an inquiry into the origin, history and purport of Freemasonry, by John Fellows, A.M. Chapter 8, Analysis of Freemasonry. The author of The Master Key to the Door of Freemasonry has judiciously remarked that the word free was added to Masonry by the society because none but the freeborn were admitted into it. And for a very obvious reason, for there could be no safety in confiding secrets to slaves, which might at any time be extorted from them by their masters. Besides, this was in conformity with the rule established in the Egyptian mysteries. Introduction. I shall now proceed to analyze Freemasonry, and as I conceive it to be no other than the forms and ceremonies of the ancient pagan religion, that is Sabeism, or the worship of the stars, the following remarks of Volney on the natural causes which led to this species of worship will not be amiss. The unanimous testimony of all ancient monuments presents us a methodical and complicated system, that of the worship of all the stars, adored sometimes in their proper forms, sometimes under figurative emblems and symbols. And this worship was the effect of the knowledge men had acquired in physics, and was derived immediately from the first causes of the social state, that is, from the necessities and arts of the first degree which are among the elements of society. Indeed, as soon as men began to unite in society, it became necessary for them to multiply the means of subsistence, and consequently to attend to agriculture. Agriculture, to be carried on with success, requires the observation and knowledge of the heavens. It was necessary to know the periodical return of the same operations of nature and the same phenomena in the skies. Indeed, to go so far as to ascertain the duration and succession of the seasons and the months of the year. It was indispensable to know in the first place the course of the sun, who in his zodiacal revolutions shows himself the first and supreme agent of the whole creation, then of the moon, who by her phases and periods regulates and distributes time, then of the stars and even planets, which by their appearance and disappearance on the horizon and nocturnal hemisphere marked the minutest divisions. Finally, it was necessary to form a whole system of astronomy or a calendar, and from these works there naturally followed a new manner of considering these predominant and governing powers. Having observed that the annuals or productions of the earth had a regular and constant relation with the heavenly bodies, that the rise, growth and decline of each plant kept pace with the appearance, elevation and declination of the same star or group of stars. In short, that the languor or activity of vegetation seemed to depend on celestial influences, men drew from thence an idea of action, of power in those beings superior to earthly bodies, and the stars dispensing plenty or scarcity became powers, genii, gods, authors of good and evil. As the state of society had already introduced a regular hierarchy of ranks, employments and conditions, men, continuing to reason by comparison, carried their new notions into their theology and formed a complicated system of gradual divinities in which the sun, as first god, was a military chief, a political king. The moon was his wife and queen. The planets were servants, bearers of commands, messengers, and the multitude of stars were a nation, an army of heroes, genii, whose office was to govern the world under the orders of their chiefs. And all the individuals had names, functions, attributes drawn from their relations and influences, and even sexes, from the gender of their appellations. A pretty fair description of a Masonic lodge, with the Worshipful Master at the head, personifying the sun, taking his place in the east, surrounded by the senior warden who acts the part of the moon, the junior warden who takes that of Orion, and the other subordinate officers and privates, all under the command of their chief, the Worshipful Master. According as the gender of the object was in the language of the nation masculine or feminine, the divinity who bore its name was male or female. Thus the Cappadocians called the moon god and the sun goddess, a circumstance which gives to the same beings a perpetual variety in ancient mythology. If it be asked to what people this system is to be attributed, we shall answer that the same monuments, supported by unanimous traditions, attribute it to the first tribes of Egypt. And when reason finds in that country all the circumstances which could lead to such a system, when it finds there a zone of sky, bordering on the tropic, equally free from the rains of the equator and the fogs of the north, when it finds there a central point of the sphere of the ancients, a salubrious climate, a great but manageable river, a soil fertile without labor or art, and placed between two seas which communicate with the richest countries, it conceives that the inhabitant of the Nile, addicted to agriculture from the nature of his soil, to geometry from the annual necessity of measuring his lands, to commerce from the facility of communications, to astronomy from the state of his sky, always open to observation, must have been the first to pass from the savage to the social state, and consequently to attain the physical and moral sciences necessary to civilized life. It was then on the borders of the Upper Nile, among a black race of men, that was organized the complicated system of the worship of the stars, considered in relation to the productions of the earth and the labors of agriculture. And this first worship, characterized by their adoration under their own forms and natural attributes, was a simple proceeding of the human mind. But in a short time, the multiplicity of the objects of their relations and their reciprocal influence having complicated the ideas and the signs that represented them, there followed a confusion, as singular in its cause as pernicious in its effects. It has been sufficiently made to appear, it is believed, that the Society of Freemasons has existed in England for upwards of 600 years. How far its principles and objects were generally understood by its members in the early stage of its establishment is unknown. But judging from the enigmatical manner in which its ritual, as handed down to us, is explained, we may conclude that the brethren, particularly the craftsmen of the three first degrees, were kept as closely hoodwinked in respect to its true import after, as they were before their initiation. The personal safety of its founders required this course. Hence the awful oaths exacted of them to keep secret the rites and ceremonies in which they were permitted to participate. These ceremonies were manufactured for the occasion and were so obscurely framed as to be rendered incomprehensible to all those not entrusted with the secret object of the institution. Besides, artifice was made use of to mislead the brethren, answers to questions propounded being often given that have no relation to their true interpretation. In short, Freemasonry is allegorical throughout, and is an imitation of the astronomical worship of the Egyptians, Hiram being substituted for Osiris. There are occasional departures from the original to accommodate it to the craft or trade of masonry, which, as before observed, is a mere finesse to cover the real design. There otherwise would have been no necessity for dividing the subject matter of the three first degrees, which may be considered as substituted for the ceremonies and secrets of the lesser mysteries, and that of the royal arch and its appendages for those of the greater. It may, however, have been the policy of the Druids to deal out their mysteries in small parcels, to try the good faith of their pupils by degrees, and to stop short or proceed with them accordingly. No account of the secret practices of Masonry had been given to the public till after its revival in 1717. The first writers who undertook to expose them were Pritchard in 1780, Master Key to the Door of Freemasonry in 1768, and Jachin and Boaz in 1776. As material alterations in the ritual have been made since the report of Pritchard, whatever may be said of old landmarks in making this analysis, I shall rely chiefly upon him and the two following expositions for an explanation of the three first degrees, which was the extent of their labors, although the author of Master Key signs himself a member of Royal Arch. On the revival of the institution, the surviving heirs of the mystery no doubt gave to the society, as far as recollected, the very words and ceremonies as delivered to them, and which Pritchard testifies under oath to be truly reported by him. This expose particularly indicates the order to be of ancient date. After perusing it, it would seem impossible to believe that men of learning, talents, and standing in society would, in the 18th century of the Christian era, seriously formed de novo such a medley, void of the least claim to wit or rationality, except in reference to the scientific worship of the heavenly bodies and other physical powers of nature. According to Pritchard, many of the questions and answers are in verse, which sufficiently indicate their druidical formation, the sense of which, however, has been changed to prose, thereby rendering the dialogue more conformable to the present taste, and at the same time divesting it of its druidical dress. In adapting this parody of the mysteries to the uninformed state of the initiated to the 3 first degrees of Masonry, although a trinity is acknowledged under the title of wisdom, strength and beauty, still the true first person is kept out of view. The maintainers of the Egyptian philosophy held that the Supreme Being, the infinitely perfect and happy, was not the creator of the world, nor the alone independent being. The Supreme Being, who resides in the immensity of space, which they call pleroma or fullness, produced from himself, say they, other immortal and spiritual natures, styled by them eons, who filled the residence of the deity with beings similar to themselves. This divinity is spoken of by Jamblichus under the name of Mf or Knef. He says that this God is an intellect, itself intellectually perceiving itself and converting intellections to itself, and is to be worshipped through silence alone. Although this God was secretly acknowledged by the philosophers and learned priests of Egypt, he was utterly unknown to the common people. And this is supposed to be the case with the Mason of the 3 first degrees. But when he arrives at the Holy Royal Arch, the discovery is made known to him. This is the awful divinity, on coming into whose presence the shocking exhibitions of thunder, lightning, etc., produce such excessive trepidation and fear. This is the wisdom, the first person of the Egyptian Trinity. Osiris the sun, the strength, the demiurgus or supposed maker of the world is the second person, and Isis the moon, the beauty of Masonry, is the third. But as the first person is not revealed to the initiates of the minor degrees, the trinity for these grades is made up wholly of visible physical powers adapted to the gross conceptions of the unenlightened, viz. Osiris, Isis and Horus, that is, the sun, moon and Orion. To prevent that satiety arising from the perusal of long rituals, particularly those in which the reader has no faith, I shall confine myself to as few items in that respect as is consistent with the necessary development of the subject. This analysis is not intended as a regular exposé of the ceremonies of Masonry. After these preliminary remarks, I commence with the manner of opening a lodge and preparing a candidate for talismanic instruction from J. Kin and Boaz. Masonry throughout is in the catechetical form, in the same manner as instruction is given to novices in all other religions. The master, before opening the lodge, demands of the officers their various stations and duties, which will appear in what are called lectures further on, ending with those of the master, whose station is in the east, because the sun rises in the east to open the day, so the master stands in the east to open his lodge and set the men to work. After the conclusion of this ceremony, the master puts on his hat and declares the lodge to be opened in the name of Holy St. John, forbidding all cursing, swearing, whispering, and all profane discourse whatever. He then gives 3 knocks upon the table and puts on his hat, the brethren being uncovered. Provided a candidate has received the approval of the lodge for admittance, the master asks if the gentleman proposed last lodge night is ready to be made, and on being answered in the affirmative, he orders the wardens to go out and prepare the person, who is generally waiting in a room at some distance from the lodge room by himself, being left there by his friend who proposed him. He is conducted into another room which is totally dark, and then asked whether he is conscious of having the vocation necessary to be received. On answering yes, he is asked his name, surname, and profession. When he has answered these questions, whatever he has about him made of metal is taken away, as buckles, buttons, rings, etc., and even the money in his pocket. Then they uncover his right knee and put his left foot with his shoe on into a slipper. This is not practiced in every lodge, some only slipping the heel of the shoe down. Hoodwink him with a handkerchief and leave him to his reflection for about half an hour. The chamber is also guarded within and without by some of the brethren who have drawn swords in their hands. The person who proposed the candidate stays in the room with him, but they are not permitted to converse together. During this silence, and while the candidate is preparing, the brethren in the lodge are putting everything in order for his reception there, such as drawing the annexed figure omitted on the floor at the upper part of the room, which is generally done with chalk and charcoal intermixed. It is drawn east and west. The master stands in the east with the square hanging at his breast, the Holy Bible opened at the Gospel of St. John, and 3 lighted tapers are placed in the form of a triangle in the midst of the drawing on the floor. The proposer then goes and knocks 3 times at the door of the apartment in which the ceremony is to be performed. The master answers within by 3 strokes with the hammer, and the junior warden asks, "Who comes there?" The candidate answers, after another, who prompts him, "One who begs to receive part of the benefit of this right worshipful lodge, dedicated to St. John, as many brothers and fellows have done before me." The doors are then opened, and the senior and junior wardens or their assistants receive him, one on the right and the other on the left, and conduct him blindfolded 3 times round the drawing on the floor, and bring him up to the foot of it, with his face to the master, the brethren ranging themselves on each side, and making a confused noise by striking on the attributes of the order which they carry in their hands. This custom is not observed in all lodges. In some lodges, the candidates are led 9 times round, but as this is very tiresome to the person who is to undergo the operation, his patience being pretty well tried by being blinded so long beforehand, it is very justly omitted. Apprentice's degree. I commenced this degree with Pritchard's report called Masonry Dissected, as inserted in the Anti-Masonic Review, which Mr. Ward, the editor, informs me he printed from a manuscript copy. It is evidently an abridgment of the original, for it opens with the examination of an apprentice previously initiated. It contains, however, enough for the present purpose. An attestation to the truth of the statement is prefixed to the document as follows: Samuel Pritchard maketh oath that the copy hereunto annexed is a true and genuine copy in every particular. I shall not confine myself to any one of the books on the subject in regular order, but take the questions and answers, or the purport of them, from either as may best suit my purpose. Question: from whence came you? Answer: from the Holy Lodge of St. John. Why the Druids gave this name to the lodge will be explained in the sequel. What recommendations brought you from thence? The recommendation which I brought from the right worshipful brothers and fellows of the right worshipful and holy lodge of St. John, from whence I came and greet you thrice heartily well. What do you come here to do? Not to do my own proper will, but to subdue my passions still, the rules of masonry in hand to take, and daily progress therein to make. Are you a mason? I am so taken and accepted to be among brothers and fellows. Where were you made a mason? In a just and perfect lodge. What makes a lodge? 5. Masons are deceived by the reason given for this number's making a lodge. The ancient theology, as before observed, being nothing more than a system of physics, a picture of the operations of nature, wrapped up in mysterious allegories and enigmatical symbols. A solution of the enigma must be sought for from that source. The Egyptians represent the world by the number 5, being that of the elements, which, says Diodorus, are earth, water, air, fire, and ether or spiritus. They are the same amongst the Indians. And according to the mystics in Macrobius, they are the supreme God or primum mobile, the intelligence or meus born of him, the soul of the world which proceeds from him, the celestial spheres and all things terrestrial. Hence, adds Plutarch, the analogy between the Greek pente, 5, and pan, all. What makes a just and perfect lodge? 7. This is in consequence of its being formed by the union of 3 and 4, which, as before observed, renders this number superlatively perfect. Masonry teaches that the above numbers are required to make a lodge because man has 5 senses and there are 7 liberal sciences, and much ridiculous parade is made in the definition of these sciences, which are thus arranged: grammar, rhetoric, logic, arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. What doth geometry teach? The art of measuring whereby the Egyptians found out their own land, or the same quantity which they had before the overflowing of the Nile. How were you prepared to be made a mason? I was neither naked nor clothed, barefoot nor shod, deprived of all metal, hoodwinked with a cable tow about my neck when I was led to the door of the lodge in a halting, moving posture. This preparation, as before noticed, is in conformity to the ancient usage in the mysteries. It is a scenical representation of the forlorn condition of man in a state of nature. The rope about the neck of the candidate, like the chain required by the Druids to be carried by their followers in the performance of their sacred rites, was, as before stated, in testimony of his submission to the will of God. How got you admittance? By 3 great knocks. Who received you? A junior warden. How did he dispose of you? He carried me up to the northeast part of the lodge and brought me back again to the west, and delivered me to the senior warden. Why the candidate begins his labors at the northeast part of the lodge has already been explained. Where did our ancient brethren meet before lodges were erected? Upon holy ground, or the highest hill or lowest vale, or in the vale of Jehoshaphat, or any other secret place, the better to guard against cowans and enemies, either ascending or descending, that the brethren might have timely notice of their approach to prevent being surprised. Cowan seems to be a corruption of Covin, which the author of The Secret Discipline, etc., noticed above, substitutes for it. This word is thus defined by Webster, Covin, Arabic, to defraud. More probably, this word belongs to some verb signifying to conceal or to agree. In Norman French, covine is a secret place or meeting. These ancient brethren were Druids, and the places mentioned are such as they used to assemble at, before the Edict of Canute entirely prohibited their public meetings, in consequence of which Druidism was changed into Freemasonry and lodges were erected. It cannot be shown that a lodge of Masons ever held a meeting for the performance of their mystic rites, except in a close room properly tiled. The groves and other places where the Druids assembled for worship were consecrated to some divinity and considered holy ground. The Vale of Jehoshaphat is here introduced as a mere juggle. It is a valley near Jerusalem where, or in Jerusalem itself, a lodge of Freemasons never held a meeting. The following extract from Holwell's Mythological Dictionary will show the reasons given by the ancients for worshipping the gods upon high hills or mountains. High places. Many of old worshipped upon hills and on the tops of high mountains, imagining that they thereby obtained a nearer communication with heaven. Strabo says that the Persians always performed their worship upon hills. Some nations, instead of an image, worshipped the hill as the deity. In Japan, most of their temples at this day are upon eminences, and often upon the ascent of high mountains, commanding fine views with groves and rivulets of clear water, for they say that the gods are extremely delighted with such high and pleasant spots. This practice in early times was almost universal, and every mountain was esteemed holy. The people who prosecuted this method of worship enjoyed an infatuation which flattered the gloom of superstition. The eminences to which they retired were lonely and silent, and seemed to be happily circumstanced for contemplation and prayer. They who frequented them were raised above the lower world, and imagined that they were brought into the vicinity of the powers of the air and of the deity who resided in the higher regions. But the chief excellence by which they were frequented was the Omphi, interpreted Theoklidon, Vox Divina, being a particular revelation from heaven. In short, they were looked upon as the peculiar places where God delivered his oracles. Many times when a reformation among the Jews was introduced by some of the wiser and better princes, it is still lamented by the sacred muse, 1 Kings 12, that the high places were not taken away. The people still turned and burnt incense on the high places. The lodge is described as extending in length from east to west, in breadth from north to south, as high as the heavens, as deep as from the surface to the center, and supported by 3 large columns or pillars named Wisdom, Strength, and Beauty. Our institution is said to be supported by wisdom, strength, and beauty, because it is necessary that there should be wisdom to contrive, strength to support, and beauty to adorn all great and important undertakings. Its dimensions are unlimited, and its covering no less than the canopy of heaven. To this object the Mason's mind is continually directed, and thither he hopes at last to arrive by the aid of the theological ladder which Jacob in his vision saw ascending from earth to heaven, the 3 principal rounds of which are denominated faith, hope, and charity. Webb. It is evident from the foregoing that a Masonic lodge is supposed to represent the world, upon which plan the ancient pagan temples were formed. The flooring of the lodge is intended to resemble the face of the earth, and the principal ceremonies performed in it are an imitation of the movements of the heavenly bodies, particularly of that great luminary, the sun, the god of Egypt. The Reverend R. Taylor, in his lecture on Masonry, very ingeniously solves the enigma of the three principal rounds of the aforesaid theological, or rather astronomical ladder. Thus, faith is the genius of spring, hope of summer, and charity of autumn. Faith in spring, because faith and works must always come together. Hope of summer, because from that point the sun looks vertically down upon the seeds which have been committed into the fertilizing womb of the earth. Charity of autumn, because then the sun empties his cornucopia into our desiring laps. Faith is the eastern pillar, charity the western, and hope the keystone of this typical arch. This theological ladder has 7 rounds and is enigmatically described in the degree called Knight of Kadosh, which I shall hereafter notice. It marks the course of the sun through 7 signs of the zodiac, commencing at the vernal equinox and ending at the autumnal, both inclusive. The semicircle made by the sun in passing these signs forms the celebrated royal arch, and a Mason to attain the degree so called must pass through the 7 grades of the order. The 3 principal steps above noticed allude to the equinoxes and the northern solstice. Why should the Master represent the pillar of wisdom and be stationed in the east? As the sun rises in the east to open and adorn the day, so rises, at these words the Master rises, the Worshipful Master in the east to open and adorn his lodge and set the craft to work. Why should the senior warden represent the pillar of strength? As the sun sets in the west to close the day, so stands the senior warden in the west to close the lodge and dismiss the men from labor, paying them their wages. The junior warden represents the pillar of beauty, because he stands in the south at high 12 at noon, which is the glory and beauty of the day, to call the men off from labor to refreshment, and to see that they come on again in due time. The above arrangement is evidently deceptive. Wisdom, applicable to the true God, who, according to pagan theology, resides in the immensity of space, is kept out of view, and Osiris the sun is substituted in his place. Strength, which is required for labor at the opening of the day and which is applicable to the sun, is transferred to its close when the men are called from labor. The senior warden properly personates Isis, indicating the productions of the earth in the fall, which ornaments and beautifies the creation. The sun, moon, and Horus or Orion, which lies directly over the equator, form the wisdom, strength, and beauty of the 3 first degrees, and they also compose the vulgar trinity of the Egyptians. The 2 principal pillars are called Jachin and Boaz, and are supposed to be placed at the equinoctial points. Boaz in the east, and Jachin in the west. The former being on the left hand, and the latter on the right, to the inhabitants of the northern hemisphere, the seat of Masonry. The equinoctial points are called pillars because the great semicircle or upper hemisphere doth seem to rest upon them. R. Taylor. In the degree of perfect master, these 2 pillars are said to be fixed crossways. It is asked, are you a perfect master? Answer, I have seen the circle and the square enclosing the 2 columns. What do the columns represent? Jachin and Boaz, through which I must have passed to arrive at the degree of perfect master. What have you done in entering the lodge? I came to the altar, worked as an entered apprentice, fellow craft and master to cross the 2 columns. Now, says Taylor, what are crossways but 2 ways of which one crosses the other? These crossways, Boaz and Jachin, are the equinoctial points at which the line of the ecliptic crosses the line of the equator, that is, the sun in his apparent path, the ecliptic, comes to shine directly over the line of the equator. This he does in spring and autumn, and only then. The fellow craft is said to receive his wages in the middle chamber, at which he arrives by 7 winding stairs, passing the 2 pillars of Boaz and Jachin. This is emblematical of the 7 circular stages made by the sun in his tour round those imaginary columns. the emerging of the sun from the lower hemisphere on the 21st of March and his return on the 27th of September may, in figurative language, be denominated his rising and setting in regard to our hemisphere. Thus Osiris, the sun, sets the husbandmen to work on his rising at the former period, and Isis, the emblem of harvest, pays them in the fruits of the earth on his return to the latter. The following figure is that by which the symbol of harvest is represented in mythology. The torch, however, was peculiar to Ceres, Isis, Ceres, Cybele, etc. So the master of the lodge, who stands in the east representing the sun, rises and sets his men to work, and the senior warden, who stands in the west representing Isis, pays them their wages. To render this personification of Isis perfectly plain, a painting of a sheaf of wheat is hung back of the senior warden's seat. Henry O'Brien, A.B., in a late work entitled Phoenician Island, Dublin, 1833, after treating of some other pagan divinities, says, "But our decision on the word Sibyl, a name by which the Irish, as well as almost all other nations, designated and worshipped Cybele, must be guided altogether by another principle. For here I at once recognize the Syriac character as derived from Cybele, an ear of corn under which guise the Phoenicians used to worship the earth as the mother of all harvests and vegetables. All nations, therefore, by one common consent, represented Cybele holding in her right hand some ears of corn wheat," page 107. Now, Cybele has been shown to be but another name for Isis. It is also worthy of remark that as the pagans constructed their temples in a manner to represent the world, they would naturally for that purpose imagine the world to be divided into three departments or chambers: the upper, the middle, and the lower. The middle chamber would of course include the autumnal equinox, and on the arrival of the sun at that point of the heavens, the laborer, the husbandman, is paid his wages in the fruits of the earth. Freemasons' Hall in London is a partial imitation of a pagan temple. In the center of the roof of this magnificent hall, says Smith, a splendid sun is represented, surrounded with the 12 signs of the zodiac. And he adds, "The scientific Freemason only knows the reason why the sun is thus placed in the center of this beautiful hall. How is the lodge situated? Due east and west, because all churches and chapels are, or ought to be so. All pagan temples were so situated in consequence of the sun's being the universal object of worship. The Egyptians, Chaldeans, Indians, Persians, and Chinese all placed their temples fronting the east to receive the first rays of the sun. Hence, the worship of the sun has been the religion of the ancient people from which these, the present race, are descended." It is true, this custom continued long after the cause which produced it ceased to be respected. Preston, in his Illustrations of Masonry, in giving a description of St. Paul's Cathedral, says, "A strict regard to the situation of this edifice, due east and west, has given it an oblique appearance in respect to Ludgate Street in front." This building was finished in 1696. Its architect, Sir Christopher Wren, in a letter dated 1707, addressed to a joint commissioner with himself for building churches to supply the places of those destroyed by the conflagration of 1666, observes, "As to the situation of the churches, I should propose they be brought forward as far as possible into the larger and more open streets. Nor are we, I think, too nicely to observe east or west in the position unless it falls out properly. Have you any ornaments in your lodge? Yes, the masonic pavement, the blazing star, and the indented or tessellated border. The mosaic pavement is the flooring of the lodge. This points out the diversity of objects which decorate and adorn the creation, the animate as well as the inanimate parts thereof. The same divine hand which hath blessed us with the sights of his glorious works in the heavens, hath also spread the earth with a beautiful carpet. He hath wrought it in various colors, fruits and flowers, pastures and meads. He hath wrought it, as it were, in mosaic work, giving a pleasing variety to the eye of man. The blazing star in the center indicates that prudence, which ought to appear conspicuous in the conduct of every Mason. The indented or tessellated border refers us to the planets which, in their various revolutions, form a beautiful border of skirt work round that grand luminary, the sun. The furniture of the lodge is the volume of the sacred law, the compass, and the square. The origin of what is called mosaic work, as well as the term by which it is designated, appears to be lost through the lapse of time. The ancients, especially the Greeks, says Bailey, adorned their floors, pavements of temples, palaces, etc., with mosaic, or rather musaic work. A work composed of many stones or other matters of different colors, so disposed as to represent diverse shapes of ornaments, birds, etc. Dr. Rees observes, the critics are divided as to the origin and reason of the name mosaic. He then gives unsatisfactory hypotheses of several writers on the subject and concludes by saying, mosaic appears to have taken its origin from paving, leaving the question as to the propriety of thus denominating any kind of paving unsolved. This matter having eluded the researchers of the learned for so many ages, it is with diffidence I offer the following remarks. The rural works, says Pluche, not being resumed in Egypt till after the Nile had quitted the plain, they for this reason gave the public sign of husbandry the name of Moses or Museus, saved from the waters, and on the same account the 9 moons during which Horus, Apollo or husbandry continued his exercises, went by the same name. Hence, as we have seen, originated the fable of the 9 muses. Isis, says the same writer, was so far the proclamation of the year that she put on such clothes and dresses as were agreeable to the 4 seasons, to announce the beginning of spring that overspreads and enamels the earth with flowers and verdure. She wore carpets of different colors, etc. Now, what could be more appropriate than to denominate the variegated and beautiful face of the earth in Egypt during the 9 months that bore the name of Moses or Museus, mosaic or musaic work, and to give the same appellation to its imitation? The Egyptians and other ancient nations held high hills, groves, etc., in superstitious veneration, and although when more civilized, in order to shelter themselves from the weather, they quilted these favorite retreats and worshipped their gods in temples, still it was natural that they should endeavor to imitate the scenes which they venerated and had been accustomed to contemplate in their former devotions. With this view, then, they decorated their temples so as in some measure to resemble the works of creation as exhibited in the places where they before assembled for religious worship. And the name mosaic or musaic would naturally occur to them as proper to be given to this ornamental work, intended to represent the face of the earth during the 9 mosaic months. How many principles are there in Masonry? 4. Point, line, superficies, and solid. Point, the center round which the master cannot err. Line, length without breadth. Solid comprehends the whole. Pritchard. This, as before observed, is the definition of the science of geometry. A point within a circle. In all regular, well-constituted lodges, there is a point within a circle which is bounded between north and south by 2 parallel lines, one representing Moses, the other King Solomon. On the upper part of this circle rests the volume of the sacred law, which supports Jacob's ladder, the top of which reaches to heaven. In going round this circle, we must necessarily touch on both these parallel lines and on the sacred volume, and while a Mason keeps himself thus circumscribed, he cannot err. In the factitious caves, which priests everywhere constructed, they celebrated mysteries which consisted, says Origen against Celsus, in imitating the motion of the stars, the planets, and the heavens. The initiated took the name of constellations and assumed the figure of animals. In the cave of Mithra was a ladder of 7 steps, representing the 7 spheres of the planets, by means of which souls ascended and descended. This is precisely the ladder in Jacob's vision, which shows that at that epoch the whole system was formed. There is in the Royal Library a superb volume of pictures of the Indian gods, in which the ladder is represented with the souls of men ascending it. I apprehend that the author is mistaken in regard to the steps of this allegorical ladder, the spheres of the planets being mere imaginary lines and not so well adapted as the permanent constellations, and in order to imitate the sun, the principal object of the pagan religious ceremonies, these would naturally be fixed upon for the purpose. The actors in the scenical representations in the cave of Mithra, by taking the name of constellations and assuming the figure of animals, corroborate this opinion. Although our ancient brethren dedicated their lodges to King Solomon, yet Masons professing Christianity dedicate theirs to St. John the Baptist and St. John the Evangelist, who were eminent patrons of Masonry, and since their time there is represented in every regular and well-governed lodge a point within a circle. The point represents an individual brother. The circle represents the boundary line of his duty to God and man, beyond which he is never to suffer his passions, prejudices, or interest to betray him on any occasion. This circle is embroidered by two perpendicular parallel lines, representing St. John the Baptist and St. John the Evangelist, who were perfect parallels in Christianity as well as Masonry. And upon the vertex rests the Book of Holy Scriptures, which point out the whole duty of man. In going round the circle, we necessarily touch upon these two lines, as well as upon the Holy Scriptures. And while a Mason keeps himself thus circumscribed, it is impossible that he should materially err. That expositors of Masonry should differ in their interpretation of this figure is not surprising. It is an astronomical enigma, the sense of which was probably lost sight of during the centuries in which the affairs of the lodge, with very few exceptions, were in the hands of ignorant craftsmen. The solution of the symbol I take to be as follows. The point in the center represents the Supreme Being, the circle indicates the annual circuit of the sun, and the parallel lines mark out the solstices within which that circuit is limited. The Mason, by subjecting himself to due bounds in imitation of that glorious luminary, will not wander from the path of duty. The device is ingenious, and its meaning ought to be restored in the lodge to its original intention. The assertion that lodges were formerly dedicated to Solomon is gratuitous, and I believe will not admit of proof. I am not sensible of any historical document that substantiates the fact. We know very little of Masonry prior to the revival of the order in 1717, and we learn by the earliest report of its practices that the old Masons hailed from the Holy Lodge of St. John. It is evident, as before observed, that the Druids adopted the names of their solstitial festivals, which had been assumed for them by the Christians, calling them St. John's Days, and it is highly probable that they resorted to the same finesse to delude their enemies, as well as those of the fraternity who were not fully initiated into their mysteries, in dedicating their lodges to these saints. This artifice of introducing the St. Johns among the symbols of Masonry has put the craft to their wits to invent a plausible story to meet the case, and they have come, it is presumed, to an erroneous conclusion that this was done by Christian Masons. What do you learn by being a gentleman Mason? Secrecy, loyalty, and good fellowship. What do you learn by being an operative Mason? To hew, square, and mold stone. Lay a level and raise a perpendicular. Have you seen your master today? Yes. How was he clothed? In a yellow jacket and blue pair of breeches. The master is the compasses, the yellow jacket is the brass body, and the blue breeches are the steel points. How old are you? Under 7. Denoting he had not passed master, or rather that he had not passed to the fellow crafts degree, 7 years being formally the term of an apprenticeship in Freemasonry, as in other trades. The 5 last questions and answers are from Pritchard, and from the simplicity of the dialogue it may be concluded the original language and facts have not been perverted, and consequently that there were accepted gentlemen Masons, that is, not of the craft, from the foundation of the institution. Fellow crafts degree. Are you a fellow craft? I am. Why were you made a fellow craft? For the sake of the letter G. What does the letter G denote? Geometry or the 5th science. In another part of the same degree, G is said to denote the grand architect and contriver of the universe. It has been seen that by the doctrine of the Pythagoreans as well as that of Masonry, the Supreme Being is often confounded with geometry as containing the principles of the material world. This is in conformity to the source from which both derive their origin. The secret doctrine of the Egyptian priests, like that of the Brahmins of India and the Magi of Persia, presents itself under the double form of a theological and cosmogonical system. It had for a basis a species of pantheism, at one moment more physical, at another more intellectual in its character, and at times again combining both of these attributes. A personification of the powers of nature, more or less identified with the powers of mind, and conceived in a point of view having reference to a mysterious unity in which the deity and the universe were blended together. On being further questioned, the respondent replies by letters 4 and science 5, this Gia right doth stand, in a due art and proportion. You have your answer, friend. The 4 letters are Boaz, 5th science, geometry. The importance bestowed upon geometry, the 5th science, according to Masonic classification, may be another reason why 5 should compose a lodge. How did you attain to this degree? By the benefit of a grip and password. The name of the grip is J-kin, that of the password Shibboleth, which denotes plenty, and is represented by a sheaf of wheat suspended near a waterford. Did you ever work? Yes, in the building of the temple. Where did you receive your wages? In the middle chamber, which I entered through the porch by 7 winding stairs, where I discovered 2 great columns or pillars. The name of the one on the left hand is Boaz and denotes strength, that on the right J-kin, which denotes to establish, and when combined, stability. For God said, in strength will I establish this mine house to stand firm forever. The house of God is the universe, which is doubtless established upon principles that will sustain it forever. The pillars Boaz and J-kin are imaginary props standing at the 2 equinoxes east and west to support the world. Here it may be remarked that the pillar representing Boaz, or the sun, is properly said to denote strength, whereas in the apprentice's degree it is made to denote wisdom. J-kin, signifying Isis the moon, was a necessary appendage to the creation and perhaps may be applied metaphorically to establish. The sun is the creator and father, the moon the mother of all things. These 2 deities govern, produce and nourish everything connected with the visible universe. The sun is the 3rd demiurgus, the supreme creative intelligence under the 3rd form. Incarnate he becomes Osiris, the author of all good, and it is he that completes the Egyptian trinity. Osiris, the sun, by his genial influence in the spring season, prepares the earth for cultivation, gives life to its various productions, and consequently enables the husbandman to commence his labors. Isis, the teeming mother, who personifies the earth as well as the moon, nourishes during the summer the seeds committed to her bosom, and in the fall season rewards the laborer. The pillars of Boaz and J-kin are described to be 18 cubits high, 12 in circumference, and 4 in diameter. The 18 cubits refer to the inundation of the Nile, being the highest elevation it is known to have attained. The 12 cubits relate to the 12 signs of the zodiac through which the sun passes, and the 4 cubits have reference to the tetractys, which comprehends the principles of geometry. Point, line, superficies, and solid. The pillars are adorned with 2 large chapiters, which are ornamented with network denoting unity, lilywork denoting peace, and pomegranates which from the exuberance of their seeds denote plenty. It is only the pillar of J-kin, which represents Isis, the emblem of harvest, that is decorated with pomegranates in the figures of these columns among the Masonic symbols. They are further adorned with 2 globes, one celestial, the other terrestrial. This display of globes, like most of the customs of Masonry, may be traced to Egypt. Dr. Richardson, as recorded in a former part of this work, in describing the gateway or porch leading to the Temple of Isis in Tentyra, says, immediately over the center of the doorway is the beautiful Egyptian ornament usually called the globe, with serpents and wings, emblematical of the glorious sun poised in the airy firmament of heaven, supported and directed in his course by the eternal wisdom of the deity. Voltaire, however, is of opinion that this globe indicated the supreme being. He says, it may be remarked that the globe placed over the door of the Temple of Memphis represented the unity of the divine nature under the name of Knife. The candidate, having learned the grip, token and password, Shibboleth, plenty, of the fellow craft, receives his wages and passes the pillar of J-kin. He is then placed in the southeast part of the lodge and thus addressed by the master. Brother, Masonry being a progressive science, when you were made an entered apprentice, you were placed in the northeast part of the lodge to show that you were newly admitted. You are now placed in the southeast part to mark the progress you have made in the science. Thus, the candidate commences his labors at that point, where the sun is supposed first to have risen at the period of the creation, and by pursuing the course of that luminary till he has completed the circuit, becomes then worthy of the master's degree. Master Mason's degree. The degree of Master Mason follows that of fellow craft, and as it contains the story of the murder of Hiram, upon which the entire fabric of masonry is erected, the very gist of the order to which all other considerations are subordinate, which meets us at every turn through all the varied scenes of the institution, it becomes necessary to possess a due knowledge of the original upon which it is founded. This is the fable of Osiris and Isis, which I therefore place as an introductory preface to the master's degree. I take the fable from L'origine de tous les cultes par Dupuy. Explanation of the travels of Isis, or the moon. The moon was associated by the ancient Egyptians with the sun in the general administration of the world, and it is she who represents the character of Isis in the sacred fable known by the title of the history of Osiris and Isis. The first men who inhabited Egypt, says Diodorus of Sicily, struck with the grandeur of the heavens and the admirable order of the universe, thought they perceived two primary and eternal causes, or two grand divinities, and they called one of them, or the sun, Osiris, and the other, or moon, Isis. The denomination of Isis given to the moon is confirmed by Porphyry and other authors, whence we draw a necessary conclusion that the courses or journeying of Isis are no other than the courses of the moon, and as the regions of the heavens are those she traverses in her monthly revolutions, we will there fix the scene of her adventures. This conclusion is justified by the passage from Ceremonies, where this learned Egyptian tells us that the Egyptians explained the fable of Osiris and Isis, as well as all other sacred fables, by the celestial bodies, by the phases of the moon, by the increase and diminution of her light, by the division of time and of the heavens into two parts, by the paranatelons, or the stars which rise and set in aspect with the signs. It is upon this principle we have explained the poem of the 12 labors of Hercules. We shall follow the same principle in the explication of the legend of Isis, of which we shall give also a comparative table with those presented by the heavens at the moment when the sun has departed from our hemisphere and left to the moon, then at her full, the empire over long nights, up to the moment when he returns again to our regions. Let us take then Isis at the epoch of the death of Osiris, her husband, and let us follow her steps from the moment when she is deprived of him, up to that when he returns to her from hell, or to drop the figure, from the moment when the sun has passed into the southern or inferior regions of the world, up to that when he repasses conqueror into the northern or superior hemisphere. Plutarch supposes that Osiris, after his travels, being on his return through Egypt, was invited to a repast by Typhon, his brother and rival. The latter put him to death and threw his body into the Nile. The sun, says Plutarch, then occupied the sign Scorpio, and the moon was full. She was then in the sign opposite to Scorpio, that is to say, to Taurus, which lent its forms to the sun of the spring equinox, or to Osiris. For at that distant period, Taurus was the sign which answered to the spring equinox. As soon as Isis was informed of the death of the unfortunate Osiris, whom all the ancients had denominated the same god as the sun, when she learned that the genius of darkness had shut him up in a coffin, she commenced a search after his body. Uncertain of the route she ought to pursue, uneasy, agitated, her heart lacerated with grief, in mourning garb she interrogates everyone she meets. She is informed by some young children that the coffin, which contains the body of her husband, had been carried by the waters out to sea, and thence to Byblos, where it was stopped, and was now reposing upon a plant which had immediately put forth a superb stalk. The coffin was so enveloped as to bear the appearance of being but a part of it. The king of the country, astonished at the beauty of the bush, had it cut, and made of it a column for his palace without perceiving the coffin which had become incorporated with the trunk. Isis, actuated by a divine impulse, arrives at Byblos. Bathed in tears, she seats herself near a fountain, where she remained overwhelmed with grief, speaking to no one until the arrival of some of the queen's women. She salutes them politely and commences dressing their hair in such a manner as to spread in it, as well as over their whole body, the odor of an exquisite perfume. The queen, learning from her women what had happened and perceiving the exquisite odor of the ambrosia, desired to know this stranger. She invites Isis to her palace, attaches her to her household, and places her as nurse to her son. The goddess then made herself known, and demanded that the precious column should be given to her. She drew from it easily the body of her husband by disengaging the coffin from the branches which covered it. These she found to be of light texture, which she perfumed with essences. She sent to the king and queen this envelope of strange boughs, which was deposited at Byblos in the temple of Isis. She then embarked and returned to Egypt to Horus her son, and deposited the body in a secluded place. Typhon, having gone that night to the chase, finds the coffin, recognized the corpse, and cuts it into 14 parts, which he scattered here and there. This is, into as many parts as there are days between the full moon and the new. This circumstance, says Plutarch, has reference to the gradual diminution of the lunary light during the 14 days that follow the full moon. The moon at the end of 14 days enters Taurus and becomes united to the sun, from whom she collects fire upon her disk during the 14 days which follow. She is then found every month in conjunction with him in the superior parts of the signs. The equinoctial year finishes at the moment when the sun and moon are found united with Orion, or the star of Horus, a constellation placed under Taurus, which unites itself to the Neomenia of spring. The moon renews herself in Taurus, and a few days after is seen in the form of a crescent in the following sign, that is Gemini, the home of Mercury. Then Orion, united to the sun in the attitude of a formidable warrior, precipitates Scorpio, his rival, into the shades of night, for he sets every time Orion appears above the horizon. The day becomes lengthened, and the germs of evil are by degrees destroyed. It is thus that the poet Nonnus pictures to us Typhon conquered at the end of winter, when the sun arrives in Taurus, and when Orion mounts into the heavens with him. The goddess, seeing this, returned to collect these dispersed fragments. She interred each part in the place where it was found. Of all the parts of the body of Osiris, those of propagation were the only ones Isis could not find. She substituted for them the phallus, which was the image of them, and which was consecrated in the mysteries. This is the precise Egyptian legend concerning Isis, which has not been handed down to us without much mutilation, and which make part of a sacred poem upon Osiris, Isis, and Typhon, their enemy. Notwithstanding the immense deficiencies discoverable in this allegorical history, it will not be difficult for us to trace a perfect correspondence between the principal features of this sacred fable which remain to us, and the representations which the heavens offer at the different epochs of the movements of the two great half which regulate the course of the seasons. The periodical march of vegetation, the division of time, and the succession of days and nights. We will now proceed, as in the poem on Hercules, to bring together these different representations, those which are presented by the fable as well as those exhibited by the heavens. We will divide them into 12 parts. Here follows a critical comparison between the wanderings of Isis in search of the dead body of Osiris and the courses of the moon in the heavens. But as the fable alone answers the purpose here intended, I omit the comparative representations. The foregoing note, however, is drawn from the part omitted. The author concludes as follows: a conformity so complete, and one which bears so many points of resemblance between the representations of the legend and those of the heavens, and which, mutilated as the legend or this sacred history may be, is so well sustained from one end to the other, as not to permit us to doubt that the astronomical priest who composed it did nothing more than write down the courses of the moon in the heavens under the title of the Wanderings of Isis, especially when it is known that Isis is the name given to the moon in Egypt. We have, in our explanation, only made use of the method laid down for us by Cheremont to analyze these sacred fables, and especially that of Osiris and Isis, which he said was relative to the increases and diminutions of the light of the moon at the superior and inferior hemispheres, and to the stars in aspect with the signs, otherwise called paranatellans. The learned men of Egypt have themselves traced out the plan which we have adopted. Here we have an ancient queen of Egypt and an ancient king, whose imaginary adventures have been described in the form of history, but who, however, as the Hercules of the Greeks, are only physical beings, and the two principal agents of nature. We are led to judge, by these examples, of the allegoric character of antiquity, and to consider how much we should be on our guard against traditions which place physical beings as characters in history. It is important not to lose sight of the fact that formerly the history of the heavens, and particularly of the sun, was written under the form of a history of men, and that the people almost universally received it as such and looked upon the hero as a man. The tombs of the gods were shown as if they had really existed. Feasts were celebrated, the object of which seemed to be to renew every year the grief which had been occasioned by their loss. Such was the tomb of Osiris, covered under those enormous masses, known by the name of pyramids, which the Egyptians raised to the star which gives us light. One of these has its 4 fronts facing the 4 cardinal points of the world. Each of these fronts is 110 fathoms wide at its base, and the 4 form as many equilateral triangles. The perpendicular height is 77 fathoms, according to the measurement given by Chazelle of the Academy of Sciences. It results from these dimensions and the latitude under which this pyramid is erected, that 14 days before the spring equinox, the precise period at which the Persians celebrated the revival of nature, the sun would cease to cast a shade at midday, and would not again cast it till 14 days after the fall equinox. Then the day, or the sun, would be found in the parallel or circle of southern declension, which answers to 5 degrees 15 minutes. This would happen twice a year, once before the spring equinox, and once after the fall equinox. The sun would then appear exactly at midday upon the summit of this pyramid. Then his majestic disk would appear for some moments, placed upon this immense pedestal, and to rest upon it, while his worshippers, on their knees at its base, extending their view along the inclined plane of the northern side of the pyramid, would contemplate the great Osiris as well when he descended into the darkness of the tomb as when he arose from it triumphant. The same might be said of the full moon of the equinoxes when it takes place in this parallel. Here we find an explanation of the time that it is said the body of Grand Master Hiram reposed in the tomb before it was discovered and raised by King Solomon, which, says Bernard, it is said had lain there 14 days, some say 15. To have suffered the body of Hiram to have remained in this tomb 15 days would have marred the original design. It would have entirely destroyed the astronomical illusion intended by the incarceration. It would seem that the Egyptians, always grand in their conceptions, had executed a project, the boldest that was ever imagined, of giving a pedestal to the sun and moon, or to Osiris and Isis, at midday for the one and at midnight for the other, when they arrived in that part of the heavens near to which passes the line which separates the northern from the southern hemisphere, the empire of good from that of evil, the region of light from that of darkness. They wished that the shade should disappear from all the fronts of the pyramid at midday during the whole time that the sun sojourned in the luminous hemisphere, and that the northern front should be again covered with shade when night began to attain her supremacy in our hemisphere. That is, at the moment when Osiris descended into the tomb, or into hell. The tomb of Osiris was covered with shade nearly 6 months, after which light surrounded it entirely at midday, as soon as Osiris, returning from hell, regained his empire in passing into the luminous hemisphere. Then he had returned to Isis and to the god of spring, Horus, who had at length conquered the genius of darkness and of winter. What a sublime idea! In the center of the pyramid is a vault, which is said to be the tomb of an ancient king. This king is the husband of Isis, the famous Osiris, this beneficent king whom the people believed to have reigned formerly over Egypt, while the priests and learned men saw in him the powerful planet which governs the world and enriches it with his benefits. And in fact, would they have ever gone to so great an expense if this tomb had not been reputed to contain the precious remains of Osiris, which his wife had collected, and which she confided, say they, to the priests, to be interred at the same time that they decreed to him divine honors? Can we suppose that there was any other object among a people who spared nothing to give all pomp and magnificence to their worship, and whose greatest luxury was a religious luxury? This seems to me to be the most reasonable conjecture that has appeared respecting the motives which caused the erection of those stupendous monuments, the pyramids. On the subject of the Sphinx, which has also caused great speculation in regard to its origin and purport, the author of The Identity of the Druidical and Hebrew Religions gives the following solution. The Sphinx was a representation of the signs Leo and Virgo joined together in commemoration of the inundation of the Nile, which occurs when the sun is in those signs. The Egyptians had always a sort of astronomical mystic reverence for the three signs, Cancer, Leo, and Virgo. Monsieur Mallet is of the same opinion. See Anthon's Classical Dictionary. The great utility of the overflowing of the Nile to Egypt, which was considered a providential occurrence, was sufficient among a superstitious people to cause its commemoration in this manner. It is there that the Babylonians, who worshipped the sun under the name of Belus, raised him a tomb which was hid by an immense pyramid. For as soon as the powerful planet which animates nature became personified, and in the sacred fictions was made to be born, to die, and to rise again, imitative worship which sought to retrace his adventures placed tombs beside their temples. Thus is shown that of Jupiter in Crete, of Mithra in Persia, of Hercules in Cadiz, of the coachman, the celestial bear of Medusa, of the Pleiades, etc., in Greece. These various tombs prove nothing for the historical existence of the feigned personages to whom the mystic spirit of the ancients had consecrated them. They show also the place where Hercules burned himself up. And we have shown that Hercules was no other than the sun personified in the sacred allegories. At the same time that we have proved that the adventures of the Queen Isis were those of the moon, sung by her worshippers. I now proceed with the Master Mason's degree. This degree, as before observed, is chiefly occupied in the pretended assassination of Hiram Abif. There is no propriety in the addition of Abif or Abif to the name of Hiram. In the original Hebrew, from which it is taken, the affix is Abi, the possessive case of Abba, which signifies father and figuratively a superior. His proper address, therefore, is my father, or in court style, my lord. In this sense, it is equivalent to Adonis, Baal, or Osiris, all names of the sun. And as Solomon's temple was built so as to imitate the world, the grand architect was very properly entitled. The Temple of Solomon, like the temples of the Egyptians and other nations of the East, is said to have been constructed with a view to a representation of the world in miniature, thereby the better to adapt it to the popular prejudice in favor of performing religious rites in places where the operations of nature were exhibited before the worshippers. This temple, therefore, was well adapted for those astronomical illusions which composed the mystic rites of the ancients, and was for this reason probably selected by the Druids as an appropriate place in which to lay the scene of Masonic mysteries. The equinoxes and solstices are called the gates of heaven through which the sun passes. It was only at the latter, however, that any obstructions were believed to occur to his free egress and regress. The scene, therefore, of the death of Hiram, who takes the part of Osiris as now acted in the lodges, is not a close imitation of the original, which has been lost sight of, but is sufficiently so to show from whence the copy is derived. Are you a master mason? I am. Try me. Prove me. Disprove me if you can. Where were you past master? In a perfect lodge of masters. What makes a perfect lodge of masters? 3. Why do 3 make a lodge? Because there were 3 grand masons in building the world, Master Key and Yakin and Boaz. Here the Kneph, Osiris and Isis of the Egyptians, the Agathon, Logos and Psyche of the Platonists, and the wisdom, strength and beauty of Masonry are too clearly indicated to admit of misinterpretation. From whence came you? From the east. Where are you going? To the west. For what purpose? To search for that which was lost. What was that which was lost? The Master Mason's word. How was it lost? By 3 great knocks, or the death of our Master Hiram. Where do you hope to find it? With a center. What is a center? A point within a circle from which every part of the circumference is equally distant. Why with a center? Because from that point, no Master Mason can err. The allusion here to Osiris, the sun, is very plain, and when found it is evident he must be on the imaginary circle made by his annual course, unless he should deviate from the order of nature. And the point in the center of that circle, according to the meaning evidently intended, it is equally certain, would be found in its proper place. The story of Hiram is as follows. At the building of Solomon's temple, 15 fellow crafts, perceiving that the work was nearly finished and not having received the master's word, grew impatient. and agreed to extort it from their master Hiram the first opportunity they could find of meeting him alone, that they might pass for masters in other countries and receive wages as such. But before they could accomplish their scheme, 12 of them recanted. The other 3, being of a more determined character, persisted in their design. Their names were Jubila, Jubilo, and Jubilum. Hiram, having entered the temple at 12 at noon, as was his custom, to pay his devotion to God, the 3 assassins placed themselves at the east, west, and south doors. Hiram, having finished his prayer, came to the east door, which was guarded by Jubila, who demanded of him the master's grip and word in a resolute manner. He received for answer from Hiram that it was not customary to ask it in such a strain, that he himself did not receive it so. He told him farther that it was not in his power alone to reveal it, except in the presence of Solomon and Hiram, king of Tyre. Jubila, being dissatisfied with this answer, struck him across the throat with a 24-inch gauge. Hiram then flew to the south door, where he received similar treatment from Jubilo, and thence to the west door, where he was struck on his head by Jubilum, with a gavel or setting maul which occasioned his death. Jashin and Boaz. Carlyle places the conspirators at the east, north, and south entrances of the temple, and makes Hiram receive the finishing stroke at the east door, whereas to render the parallel in strict accordance as an allegory of the death of Osiris, Hiram should expire at the north or south gate or door. The story is badly conceived, as there is no pretext for confining the word to Solomon and the 2 Hirams, nor for requiring that it should not be communicated except in the presence of the 3. Besides, according to Masonic tradition, there were at the same time 3,300 master masons employed on the temple, who must of course have been furnished with the master's word. To make out the parody, however, it was necessary that Hiram be put to death, and a cause must be invented to procure it. And although the one fixed upon for the purpose appears very male apropos, it seems to be satisfactory to the craft. It may be remarked, however, that Solomon and the 2 Hirams are here intended to represent the Trinity in unity, and therefore it may be supposed could not act separately. How did the ruffians dispose of the body? They carried it out at the west door, according to the apparent course of the sun, and hid it till 12 o'clock the next night, when they met by agreement and buried it on the side of a hill in a grave 6 feet perpendicular, dug due east and west, and stuck down a sprig of cassia to mark the place. Cassia, my friends, did not grow about Jerusalem. Dr. Dalcho. Master Hiram not coming to view the workmen as usual, King Solomon caused search to be made for him in and about the temple, which proving ineffectual, he ordered the roll of workmen to be called, when it was found that 3 were missing, namely Jubila, Jubilo, and Jubilum. The 12 fellow crafts who had recanted then went to Solomon with white aprons and gloves, emblems of their innocence, and informed him of everything relating to the affair as far as they knew, and offered their assistance to discover the 3 others who had absconded. Solomon then ordered 12 trusty fellow crafts to be selected, and sent 3 east, 3 west, 3 north, and 3 south in search of Hiram. Elder Bernard gives 15 as the number selected for this purpose, and adds, in some lodges they send only 12, when their own lectures say 15 were sent. The elder was not aware of the vast importance of confining the number to precisely 12. Those who were deputed for this service represented the 12 signs of the zodiac, one of whom would be sure to find their Grand Master Hiram, the personification of Osiris the sun. The party that took a westerly course fell in with a wayfaring man near the coast of Joppa, who on being interrogated informed them that he had seen 3 men pass that morning, whom from their appearance he took to be workmen from the temple. They had been seeking for a passage to Ethiopia, and not being able to obtain it, had turned back into the country. This party then returned and made their report to Solomon. Of the 3 who steered an easterly course, one, being weary, sat down at the brow of a hill to rest and refresh himself. And in rising, he caught hold of a twig, which coming easily up, excited his suspicions. And perceiving the ground to have been recently broken, he hailed his companions, and on searching they found the body of their Grand Master Hiram, decently buried in a handsome grave, 6 feet east and west and 6 feet perpendicular. and its covering was green moss and turf, which surprised them, whereupon they exclaimed, "Muscus domus Dei gratia," which, according to Masonry, is, "Thanks be unto God, our master has got a mossy house." So they covered him closely and went and acquainted King Solomon. The Latin tongue seems to have been familiar to the Hebrew masons of King Solomon's temple. In regard to the conspirators, it shall suffice here to say that according to the story they were discovered, arrested and executed. Jubileum's body was severed in two and scattered in south and north, Jachin and Boaz. After which Solomon ordered 12 crafts to take up the body of Hiram in order that it might be interred in a solemn manner in the sanctum sanctorum. He also told them if they could not find a key word about him, it was lost, for there were only 3 in the world to whom it was known, and unless they were present, it could not be delivered. And Hiram being dead, it consequently was lost. But the first sign and word that were made and spoken at his raising should be the master's word ever after. The 12 crafts went and cleared the rubbish and found their master in a mangled condition, having lain 14 days, upon which they lifted up their hands above their heads and exclaimed, "O Lord my God." They failed in their attempts to raise the body, either by the grip of the apprentice or that of the fellow craft, the flesh cleaving from the bone, upon which they all raised their hands and exclaimed, "O Lord my God, I fear the master's word is forever lost. Was there no help for the widow's son?" King Solomon then ordered a lodge of master masons to be summoned and said, "I will go myself in person and try to raise the body by the master's grip or lion's paw. Some say by the strong grip or lion's paw. Bernard." By means of this grip, the body of Grand Master Hiram was raised. The raising of Osiris, the prototype of Hiram. The author of The Secret Discipline, etc., before noticed, remarks on the password of this degree that, by a singular lapsus linguae, the moderns have substituted Tubal Cain in the 3rd degree for Timhoxene to be entombed. This, in the ancient Catechiesis Arcani, was the password from the symbolical representation of the state of death to the restored and undying existence. If this affair would admit of serious criticism upon the supposition that this word was a mere name, term, or phrase, it might be asked what was the use in seeking for that which, when found, could not be made use of, unless the finders turned traitors and exposed it unlawfully. The story, as before observed, wants plausibility. This word, however, is not a name, it is the personified logos, the keystone of the arch, the absence of which rendered the structure incomplete. That Solomon and the 2 Hirams are made to personate the pagan trinity is evident from the following. Master: what supports our lodge? Answer: 3 pillars. Pray, what are their names, brother? Wisdom, strength, and beauty. What do they represent? 3 grand masters: Solomon, king of Israel, Hiram, king of Tyre, and Hiram Abif. The 3 grand masters in the building of Solomon's temple. And we were before told there were 3 grand masons in building the world, of which Solomon's temple was an epitome. The names Jubela, Jubilo, Jubelum, given to the pretended assassins of Hiram, I take to be a play upon the word jubilum, the Latin term answering to jubilee. They were, of course, formed at the time Freemasonry was first established. The inflections of this word will give jubilee, jubilo, jubilum. That a slight variation should have taken place in their pronunciation will not appear surprising when it is considered that they have been handed down orally by illiterate men through many ages. Jubilum is derived from jubeo, to appoint. It also signifies to bid, order, charge, or command. Now, these reputed assassins are represented as demanding, in an imperious and authoritative tone, of Grand Master Hiram, the master's grip and word, and their names were probably given in allusion to this circumstance, being appropriate to the character assumed for them. Besides the relation which the story of Hiram bears to that of Osiris, there is a singular fancy set forth in ancient astronomy in regard to the reputed murderers of Krishna, which contains a strict analogy to the supposed assassination of Hiram. Krishna among the Hindus is the same as Osiris with the Egyptians and is worshipped by them in like manner. Nothing could be more explanatory of the fable of Hiram than this astronomical notion, which is given in Mackey's mythological astronomy as follows. The stories which have been the result of the particular method made use of by ancient historians to express the various changes of the constellations and seasons of the year, and the causes of those changes may be worth our while to examine. The Elohim, the decans, or the symbols which presided over the 36 subdivisions of the zodiac, or more properly speaking, of the year, each month having 3, were those gods whose care it was to regulate the weather in the different seasons and who were supposed to vary it according to their will. These decans or Elohim are the gods of whom it is said the Almighty created the universe. They arranged the order of the zodiac. The Elohim of the summer were gods of a benevolent disposition. They made the days long and loaded the sun's head with topaz, while the 3 wretches that presided in the winter, at the extreme end of the year, hid in the realms below, were, with the constellation to which they belong, cut off from the rest of the zodiac, and as they were missing, would consequently be accused of bringing Krishna into those troubles which at last ended in his death. This is a sketch of the life of the sun who, finishing his career at the winter solstice when Typhon and the rebel angels gain the dominion, seems to be put to death by them, but who soon after is born again and rises into the vault of heaven where he reigns. 11 is one of the numbers singled out to make a lodge which, like the rest, must have an astronomical illusion. And there is little doubt that it refers to the fanciful notion just detailed in regard to the defection of one of the great gods composing the zodiac, with his attendant satellites, the decans, or Elohim. In consequence of this treachery, but 11 of these great chiefs remained faithful to their lord, the supreme ruler, the sun. This circumstance would be sufficient to cause the commemoration of that number in the manner it is done in Masonry. It may be remarked that the lamentations uttered for the death of Grand Master Hiram is in exact accordance with the customs of the Egyptians in their celebrations of the fabled death of Osiris the sun, of the Phoenicians for the loss of Adonis, and of the Greeks in their mystic rites of the Eleusinian series. It is through the instrumentality of Leo that Osiris the sun is relieved from his perilous condition. The strong paw of the lion wrests him from the clutches of Typhon and places him in his wonted course. Anubis, the dog star, is the herald of this event. Here we see the archetype of the raising of Grand Master Hiram by the strong gripe or lion's paw. In short, the attentive reader must have perceived that the story of Hiram is only another version, like those of Adonis and Astarte, and of Ceres and Proserpine, of the fable of Osiris and Isis. The likeness throughout is so exact as not to admit of doubt. The search for the body of Hiram, the inquiries made of a wayfaring man, and the intelligence received. The sitting down of one of the party to rest and refresh himself, and the hint conveyed by the sprig over the grave. The body of Hiram remaining 14 days in the grave prepared by the assassins before it was discovered, all have allusion to and comport with the allegory of Osiris and Isis. The condition even in which the grave of Hiram is found, covered with green moss and turf, corresponds very much with that in which Isis found the coffin of Osiris. Again, the cutting up and scattering the parts of the body of Jubileum is a facsimile of the treatment which the body of Osiris is said to have received. By the way, the oath imposed upon the Master Mason very likely grew out of the fable of Typhon's murder of Osiris, and afterwards cutting up the body into 14 pieces and scattering them hither and thither on the plains of Egypt. Select Master's Degree. Mr. Cole, editor of the Freemasons' Library, says, "There are, I am bold to assert, but 4 degrees in ancient Freemasonry. This opinion accords not only with the sentiments of the oldest and best informed Masons with whom I have conversed, but is also agreeable to written and printed documents, some of the latter of which are almost as old as the art of printing itself. The intermediate degrees between the Masters and that of Royal Arch, which he considers the 4th, which have, he says, within a few years past been manufactured into degrees, are merely elucidatory of the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. Why, Mr. Cole need not have gone farther back into antiquity than to 1750 to learn that at that time but 3 degrees of Masonry were known to the world. The party who styled themselves Ancient Masons about this time discovered the Royal Arch among the archives of the order, as has been shown above, but which those called moderns were strangers to and did not then acknowledge. The division of Masonry into degrees is entirely arbitrary, and since operative masonry is no longer taught in the lodge, unnecessary. The reasons which governed in the administration of the pagan rites, which concealed from the initiates of the lesser mysteries the apparata, or grand secret which was communicated to those of the greater, are inapplicable to masonry. For that secret, the existence of one supreme God and the error of polytheism, is now openly taught amongst all nations where Freemasonry is established. The affectation, therefore, of confining this knowledge to the companions of the Royal Arch is at this time extremely absurd. What Mr. Cole advances, however, in regard to the connection in the matter of the several degrees which he notices, is evidently very correct, and the same might be said of the two first degrees, which are merely preparatory to the third. Still, I am inclined to believe that the founders of the order divided its secrets or ceremonies originally into 7 grades. It was incumbent upon them to move slowly and to manage the subjects with whom they had to deal with much caution for fear of a disclosure. Besides, 7 steps seem necessary to complete the rounds of the Holy Royal Arch, the grand desideratum of Masonry. Of the Mark and Past Master's degrees there is nothing worthy of notice, excepting one circumstance in that of the latter, which is the electing of a newly initiated member on the night of his admission to preside pro tempore as Master of the Lodge, and then for the brethren to exercise their wit at his expense by exposing his ignorance of the duties of the office imposed upon him, finally knocking off his hat and dragging him from the master's chair. This, as has been noticed above, is in perfect accord with the customs of the Pythagorean school, which treated novitiates in like manner. In regard to the select master's degree, Mr. Cole observes, "We know of no degree in Masonry that has a more needful or more important connection with another than the select with the Royal Arch. It fills up a chasm which every intelligent Mason has observed, and without it, it seems difficult, if not impossible, to comprehend clearly some of the mysteries that belong to the august degree of Royal Arch. Indeed, such is the nature of the degree that we cannot feel freedom to allude remotely to its secrets." And Mr. Cross remarks, "Without this degree, the history of the Royal Arch cannot be complete. It materially accounts for the concealment and preservation of those essentials of the craft, which were brought to light at the erection of the Second Temple, and which lay concealed from the Masonic eye 470 years. The fact is, the grand omnific, all-creating lost word, it will be seen in the sequel, was eventually found in a vault under the ruins of Solomon's Temple, and the difficulty was rationally to account for the manner in which it got there. This, therefore, is the grand object of the select master's degree, and at the same time so to locate the word as symbolically to represent its archetype, the sun lost in the inferior hemisphere. For this purpose, a history of the order was manufactured by its founders, of which the following is a sketch. The 3 grand masters, at the building of the temple, entered into a solemn agreement not to confer the master's degree until the temple should be completed, that all 3 must be present when it should be conferred, and if either should be taken away by death, prior to the finishing of the temple, the master's degree should be lost. After this wise arrangement, lest the knowledge of the arts and sciences, together with the patterns and valuable models which were contained in the temple, should be lost, they agreed to build a secret vault underground, leading from Solomon's most retired apartment in due west course, and ending under the sanctum sanctorum of the temple, to be divided into 9 separate arches. The 9th arch was to be the place for holding the Grand Council, and also for a deposit of a true copy of all those things which were contained in the sanctum sanctorum above. After the 9th arch was completed, the 3 Grand Masters deposited therein those things which were important to the craft, such as the Ark of the Covenant, a pot of manna, the rod of Aaron, the book of the law, etc. Prior to the completion of the temple, Grand Master Hiram Abiff was assassinated, and by his death the master's word was lost. The 2 kings were willing to do all in their power to preserve the sacred word, and as they could not communicate it to any by reason of the death of Hiram, they agreed to place it in the secret vault, that if the other treasures were ever brought to light, the word might be found also. The all-creating or omnific word was deposited in the royal vault, the term used in this degree, as is said, in 3 languages, Yah, Bel, On, which are all names of the sun. The direction of the arches, from east to west, is following the apparent course of that luminary. The royal vault, therefore, is a symbol of the lower regions in which the sun, the king and governor of the world, was supposed to be lost, who under the name of Osiris, persecuted by Typhon and the tyrants of the air, was put to death, shut up in a dark tomb, emblem of the hemisphere of winter, and afterwards, ascending from the inferior zone towards the zenith of heaven, arose again from the dead, triumphant over the giants and the angels of destruction. The 9 arches have an astronomical allusion in regard to the latitude of the place where the scene is intended to be laid. Mackey accounts for the origin of the mysterious numbers among different nations in the following manner. In the Asiatic Researches, Volume 8, page 289, we are told that 7 was formerly a favorite and fortunate number among the Hindus, 8 among the Buddhists, and 9 formerly in the West and in the north of Asia. 9 was held a sacred and mystical number in the northern parts of the continent, from China to the extremity of the West. And why? Because the people there lived under the same elevation of the pole. They all saw the great dial of the deity from the same point of view. They all saw the pole from the 9th stage of the world, that is the 9th climate, from which it would be seen as a pyramid with 9 steps, while from the latitude of 32, the 8th stage of the world, it would be seen as a cone or pyramid with 8 steps. At Delhi, in latitude 28, which is in the 7th stage or climate, the pole was represented by a cone of 7 steps. Hence we find the cause which induced the ancients in the above latitudes to venerate the numbers 7, 8, 9 was astrogeographically. And hence also we see the impossibility of making the astronomical numbers of a large empire agree with one capital. According to Herodotus, the Tower of Babel, which was in the latitude of 32 degrees, had a roadway up on the outside which went 8 times round in its ascent, so as to give the whole the appearance of 8 towers, one above another. These were no doubt intended to commemorate the 8 revolutions of the pole, which represented a serpent coiled 8 times round a mountain. Besides the 8-valved Tower of Babel, in the latitude of 32 degrees, we find at Pekin a tower of porcelain 10 stories high, thereby indicating its latitude to be 40 degrees. For in that situation, the North Pole is so far elevated above the horizon as to admit 10 valves of the serpent. Again, in Egypt, we find the statue of Pluto with a serpent coiled 6 times round him, which represents the 6 valves of the pole of the ecliptic round the south pole of the earth, which shows that the statue must have been erected at or near Thebes or Elephantine. Thus we see that from Pekin to Elephantine, the men of learning agree in coupling the histories of their countries with that of the heavens. I'm induced to add the following curious remarks of the same writer, as in some measure explanatory of the preceding. The stories of the pagans concerning the ascension of their gods into heaven and their descent into hell have produced in the minds of modern Europeans the most absurd notions, such as never entered the minds of the first astronomers, who divided the heavens into 3 grand divisions in the most simple manner imaginable. They observed towards the north that a circuit in the heavens always appeared above the horizon. This they denominated one great empire, and as there is a point in the middle of it which is always stationary, this they made the seat of that empire and subjected it to the government of a monarch, who could from his throne, that is the pole, behold all the nations of the earth, both by night and by day. This notion doubtless gave rise to the custom of symbolizing the deity by a circle with a dot in its center. They could not but be sensible of that part of the vast concave that is forever hid from our sight, surrounding the South Pole. This was distinguished as another grand division and called the pit, in contradistinction from the opposite, which was called the mountain. An allusion to this idea seems to be made in the expression, "Who shall ascend to the hill of the Lord?" Or as Cole in his Freemason's library has it, "Scale the Mount of God." Hence among the ancients arose the epithets of Helion and Acheron, which meant nearly the same, as Helion is the sun in his highest, which the Greeks pronounce Helios, that is, Elias the Most High. Acheron is generally translated hell. It is compounded of Akar, the last state or condition, and On, the sun. Acheron therefore signifies the last state or condition of the sun, alluding to his annual disappearance in those constellations which were in the neighborhood of the South Pole. We see by the precession of the equinoctial points that while one sign is sinking into the bottomless pit, another sign is ascending into heaven, that is, rising up towards the pole. And as the inhabitants of the earth are insensible of its motion, they thought the pole of heaven revolved round that of the earth, describing a figure like a serpent coiled 8 times, which would seem like a ladder with 8 rounds reaching from the earth up to the pole, that is, the throne of Jove. Up this ladder then the gods, that is, the signs of the zodiac, ascended and descended. Most excellent master's degree. This degree is introduced in Masonic books as follows: none but the meritorious and praiseworthy, none but those who through diligence and industry have advanced far towards perfection, none but those who have been seated in the oriental chair by the unanimous suffrages of their brethren can be admitted to this degree of Masonry. In its original establishment, when the Temple of Jerusalem was finished, and the fraternity celebrated the copestone with great joy, it is demonstrable that none but those who had proved themselves to be complete masters of their profession were admitted to this honor. And indeed the duties incumbent on every Mason who is accepted and acknowledged as a most excellent master are such as render it indispensable that he should have a correct knowledge of all the preceding degrees. This degree contains a detail of the ceremony in the celebration of the passage of the sun through the first celestial gate, the winter solstice. That is the 25th day of December, which, as we have seen, was commemorated as the birthday of the god Sol. The sun was the key or copestone required to complete, or rather to form, the arch, and this raised by Masons is a symbol of that made by the sun in the heavens, and is commemorative of the commencement of his return to the upper hemisphere, in which that arch is formed. This degree in some measure anticipates the subject of the royal arch, in which the story of the finding of the lost son, logos or word, is consummated. For the purpose of opening the lodge, the brethren assemble round the altar and form a circle, leaving a space for the master. All then kneel and join hands, and the master reads the following passages from Scripture. Psalm 24, "The earth is the Lord's, and the fullness thereof, the world, and they that dwell therein. For he hath founded it upon the seas, and established it upon the floods. Who shall ascend into the hill of the Lord? Or who shall stand in his holy place? He that hath clean hands and a pure heart, who hath not lifted up his soul unto vanity, nor sworn deceitfully, he shall receive the blessing from the Lord, and righteousness from the God of his salvation. This is the generation of them that seek him, that seek thy face, O Jacob, Selah. Lift up your heads, O ye gates, and be ye lift up, ye everlasting doors, and the King of glory shall come in." Who is this King of glory? The Lord strong and mighty, the Lord mighty in battle. Lift up your heads, O ye gates, even lift them up, ye everlasting doors, and the King of glory shall come in. Who is this King of glory? The Lord of hosts, he is the King of glory. Selah. 2 Chronicles 6. Then said Solomon, "The Lord hath said that he would dwell in the thick darkness. But I have built a house of habitation for thee, and a place for thy dwelling forever." And the king turned his face and blessed the whole congregation of Israel. As the master reads the words, "Lift up your heads, O ye gates," each brother raises his head. And as he continues, "And the King of glory shall come in," he steps along a few steps towards the space left for him in the circle. The foregoing passage from the Psalms is very appropriate to the object of commemoration in this ceremony. For although the psalmist alluded to the true God, the language made use of would equally apply to the pagan god, the sun. The Abbé Pluche observes, as before noticed, that the tongue and religion of the Hebrews were originally the same as the Egyptians, and notwithstanding the variations which afterwards took place between them, the forms of prayer remained the same. So in this case, the expressions, "the hill of the Lord, the King of glory, the Lord mighty in battle," may be applied to the course of the sun, the veneration in which he was held, and his wars and victories over Typhon, the genius of evil. King, moreover, was one of the peculiar titles bestowed upon Osiris the sun. He was denominated, says Pluche, the leader, the king, the moderator of the stars, the soul of the world, the governor of nature. Besides, the term made use of above, Hasis or Jesus, and translated Lord, is a pagan name of the deity, and answers, says the same author, to the Warts or Mars of the Sabines and Latins. So the idea in Chronicles of the Lord's dwelling in darkness might anciently among the pagans have alluded to the sun in the lower hemisphere or enveloped in clouds for a time in the Tropic of Cancer. The reading being ended, the master kneels and joins hands with the others, which closes the circle. They then rise, disengage their hands and lift them up above their heads, cast up their eyes, and then suffer their hands to fall by their sides. This sign, it may be presumed, is intended to express admiration and gratitude for the return of the sun. After some further ceremonies, the senior warden demands of the most excellent, if this be not the day set apart for the celebration of the copestone, which being ascertained to be the fact, the brethren form a procession double file and march 6 times round the lodge against the course of the sun, singing the following song. All hail to the morning that bids us rejoice. The temple's completed, exalt high each voice. The copestone is finished, our labor is o'er. The sound of the gavel shall hail us no more. Companions, assemble on this joyful day. The occasion is glorious, the keystone to lay. Fulfilled is the promise by the ancient old days to bring forth the copestone with shouting and praise. Thy wisdom inspired the great institution. Thy strength shall support it till nature expire. And when the creation shall fall into ruin, its beauty shall rise through the midst of the fire. The keystone is now brought forward, and 2 pillars or columns are set up, and an arch placed on them, made of plank in imitation of blockwork, in the center of which is a mortise left for the reception of a keystone, which the master takes, and placing it in the arch, drives it down by giving it 6 raps with his gavel. The ark, which all this time had been carried round by 4 of the brethren, is now put upon the altar and a pot of incense placed on it. The members all kneel, and while in this attitude the master reads the following passage of scripture, 2 Chronicles 7:1-4. Now when Solomon had made an end of praying, the fire came down from heaven and consumed the burnt offering and the sacrifices. And the glory of the Lord filled the house, and the priests could not enter into the house of the Lord, because the glory of the Lord had filled the Lord's house. And when all the children of Israel saw how the fire came down and the glory of the Lord upon the house, they bowed themselves with their faces to the ground upon the pavement and worshipped and praised the Lord, saying, For he is good, for his mercy endureth forever. As the master reads the last clause of the above extract, a brother touches a piece of gum camphor to a candle and throws it into the pot of incense of the same combustible matter, which stands on the altar before the kneeling brethren, which immediately ignites and makes a very brilliant light. Here the emblem of the restoration of the lost sun is too plain to be mistaken. The reader may recollect the account, given in a former part of this work, of a similar ceremony in the ancient mysteries, in which, after great lamentation for the loss of Adonis or Osiris the sun, there was also great joy at his finding. It is said that this lamentation was performed over an image in the night season, and when they had sufficiently lamented, a candle was brought into the room, which ceremony might mystically denote the return of the sun. Then the priest, with a soft voice, muttered this form of words, Trust ye in God, for out of pain salvation is come unto us. After the above, the brethren all repeat in concert the words, For he is good, for his mercy endureth forever, 6 times, each time bowing their heads low towards the floor. The companions of Royal Arch, previously to giving the grand omnific word, balance 3 times 3, with their hands joined, bringing them down on their knees 9 times, making a pause between each 3. Similar customs prevail in China at this day, which no doubt are derived from the same source as those of Masonry. The following extract from the Chinese Courier, published at Canton, November 1832, establishes this fact. Peking His Majesty a few days ago, when worshipping and offering sacrifice on the altar of Huangte, the Yellow Emperor and divine originator of agriculture, drank the cup of bliss and performed the grand ceremony of thrice kneeling and 9 times putting his forehead to the ground. It seems he did not much like it, for he has censured the master of the ceremonies for giving the words, kneel, knock, kneel, knock, kneel, knock, too slowly. He complained also that the man who read the prayer had but a poor voice, and commands that another be chosen who has a strong, clear voice and is perfectly acquainted with the detail of rites and ceremonies. On the 13th of May, the emperor went in person to the altar of the Black Dragon to pray for rain, and appointed select Bud priests with several princes and kings to form two parties and alternately lodge at the temple to continue their supplications till rain should be granted. The members then balance 6 times, as in opening, rise and balance 6 times more, and the lodge is closed. Ancient Freemasonry could have no connection with the Hebrew scriptures, any farther than they contained sentiments and expressions in common use among other nations. Or if the founders of the institution adopted passages of scripture, they perverted them to suit their own peculiar views. We have seen that the prospect of the return of the sun to the northern hemisphere caused great rejoicings among the ancient pagan nations, and the expression "for he is good, for his mercy endureth forever" is peculiarly applicable to that circumstance. The sentiment conveyed in the first verse of the foregoing song, calling upon the brotherhood to rejoice, in consequence of having arrived at the end of their labors, is well illustrated in the following extract from Bryanf's Mythology, Volume 3, page 38, which alludes to a fact noticed above. Part of the ceremony in the Eleusinian Mysteries was a night scene attended with tears and lamentations, on account of some person who was supposed to have been lost. But at the close, a priest used to present himself to the people who were mourning and bid them to be of good courage, for the deity whom they lamented as lost was preserved, and that they would now have some comfort, some respite after all their labor. To which was added, "I have escaped a calamity and met with a better portion." This is the same rite as that which was called in Canaan the death and revival of Adonis or Tammuz, who was the Osiris and Tammuz of Egypt. Again, the same author observes, Volume 3, page 179. The principal rites in Egypt were confessedly for a person lost and consigned for a time to darkness, who was at last found. This person I have mentioned to have been described under the character of Osiris. Hence these exclamations at the feast of Isis, Eurychomea Sagiromen, "We have found him, and we rejoice together." After Osiris had been reputed for some time lost, it was a custom among the Egyptians to go in quest of him, and the process, as described by Plutarch, was very remarkable. Upon the 19th of the month, the Egyptians go down at night to the sea, at which time the priests and supporters, the paterae, carry the sacred vehicle. In this is a golden vessel in the form of a ship or boat into which they pour some of the river water. Upon this being performed, a shout of joy is raised, and Osiris is supposed to be found. The blaze of the gum camphor of Masonry seems more appropriate than the above to typify the restoration of the lost sun. The last verse of the song cited above contains a beautiful allusion to the Masonic Trinity, and at the same time forcibly conveys the idea that the writer meant by the establishment of the great institution the creation of the world, planned by infinite wisdom, supported by strength, and adorned by beauty. Jubilee at Rome. The Church of Rome practices a rite very similar to that of the Masonic order in laying the copestone. It is called the Jubilee, and the manner of performing it, says Bailey, is as follows. The Pope goes to St. Peter's Church to open what they call the Holy Gate, knocking at it 3 times with a golden hammer, repeating the 19th verse of the 118th Psalm, "Open to me the gates of righteousness, and I will go unto them and praise the Lord." At this time, the Masons break down the wall, and the Pope kneels before it, while the penitentiaries of St. Peter wash him with holy water. Then, taking up the cross, he begins to sing the Te Deum and enters the church, the clergy following him. In the meantime, the cardinal legates are sent to open 3 other holy gates, with the same ceremonies in the churches of St. John of Lorraine, St. Paul, and St. Mary the Greater. This is performed at the first Vespers of Christmas Eve, and the next morning the Pope gives his benediction to the people in the Jubilee form. When the Holy Year is ending, they shut the gates again in the following manner. The Pope, after he has blessed the stones and mortar, lays the first stone and leaves there 12 boxes of gold and silver medals. Formerly, much people resorted from all parts to Rome to enjoy the benefits of the Jubilee, but nowadays but few. except those who dwell in Italy, the Pope allowing them to observe the Jubilee in their own country, granting the same benefits as if they came to Rome. There can be no possible meaning in this ceremony unless an astronomical bearing be attributed to it by considering the 4 gates as symbols of the equinoctial and solstitial points, which by the pagans were denominated gates of heaven, and through which souls were supposed to pass to arrive at the mansions of bliss. And as the Pope hold the keys of these gates, it is kind in them occasionally to open them in order to admit a few at least of their own flock. The 12 boxes of medals deposited by His Holiness are emblematical of the 12 signs of the zodiac, which he, perhaps, considers as resting places on his celestial turnpike. This farce is still continued at Rome, of which a late traveller in Italy gives the following account. Closing the holy door. At 4 o'clock on the day of the Jubilee, the sound of trumpets was heard. In the midst of a procession which issued from the church, passing through the holy door, was His Holiness the Pope, clothed in white robes and wearing a golden mitre. He seated himself on his white throne and remained quiet for a minute or two. He then descended from his throne and performed some ceremonies or mummeries. I sincerely pitied the poor old man. He looked the picture of death and had been raised from his bed to personate St. Peter. He appeared to sink under the weight of his robes. His cumbrous mitre oppressed his aching head. He raised his heavy eyes and held up his skinny fingers and seemed to say, "How painful are hypocrisy, folly, and fraud to a sick and dying man." The cardinals came about him in a fawning manner and changed for him a part of his dress. At the closing of the holy door, we were somewhat disappointed. We beheld only the feeble pattering of an impotent old man. He blessed the golden trowel and its handle of mother of pearl. He blessed the mortar and the bricks. He contrived to lay 3 bricks in the holy doorway, using his holy mortar sparingly as though it were lip salve. The doorway being thus closed, a white satin curtain, decorated with a cross in golden embroidery, was drawn over it. The Holy Father, with as much theatrical gesticulation as he was capable of, gave his blessing, which concluded the farce of closing the holy door. The opening and closing of the holy gates or doors must be an annual ceremony and therefore differs from what is generally called the Jubilee. Jubilees were formerly celebrated by the Jews every 50th year. Pope Sextus IV, in 1475, appointed it to be held every 25th year, to give a greater chance for every person to receive the benefit of it once in his life. They afterwards became more frequent, and the popes granted them as often as the Church or themselves had occasion for them. There is usually one at the inauguration of a new pope. At these jubilees, the Pope grants full pardon to all sinners who are present at their celebration. We have seen in the Masonic ceremonies a constant reiteration of the number 3, and sometimes thrice repeated, which is called giving the grand honors of Masonry. There must have been some cause or reason for this custom now unknown, and I will venture to say that, as suggested by the author of the Defense of Freemasonry before noticed, its original intention was in honor and out of reverence to the ancient Trinity. The practice seems to be kept up by the Church of Rome, which goes to corroborate this opinion. One of the rules established by the Reverend Mother Abbess of the Ursuline Convent at Charlestown, as reported by Miss Reed, one of the novices in that institution, is, before entering the room, to give 3 knocks on the door, accompanied with some religious ejaculation, and wait until they are answered by 3 from within. The Mason will see that this is an exact copy of his rules and practice. The reader has observed that the number 6, in the degree under consideration, is particularly respected. In the opening scene of initiations not noticed above, the candidate is prepared with a rope wound 6 times round his body and is then conducted to the door of the lodge, against which he gives 6 distinct knocks, which are answered by the same number from within, and when admitted he is walked 6 times round the lodge, moving with the sun. On the contrary, the brethren more advanced form a procession, as above stated, and march 6 times round the lodge against the course of the sun. Masons from habit pass through these ceremonies without stopping to examine into their meaning and original intention. The Druids also paid great veneration to the number 6. As to what remains, says Mayo, Volume 2, page 239, respecting the superstitions of the Druids, I know not what was the foundation of the religious respect which they had for the number 6, but it is certain they preferred it to all other numbers. It was the 6th day of the moon that they performed their principal ceremonies of religion, and that they began the year. They went 6 in number to gather the mistletoe, and in monuments now extant we often find 6 of these priests together. In every movement of the Masonic order we discover traits of its derivation from a religion founded on astronomy. The Egyptians worshipped astronomy. They were the first people known to have acquired a knowledge of it. Their priests, shut up in the labyrinth, had nothing else to do but to study the movements of the heavenly bodies, and they communicated their discoveries in such a manner as to be incomprehensible to the common people. So in Masonry, the novice is marched round the lodge in conformity to the apparent movement of the sun, but afterwards the direction of the procession is reversed, showing that this appearance is produced by the actual movement of the earth from west to east round the sun. But this explanation is not given, and consequently the purport of the ceremony is not understood by the brethren. Making the procession 6 times round the lodge is in honor of the 6 benevolent divinities of the upper hemisphere. Volney, in treating of the notion the Persians had of the future world, and that paradise is placed under the equator, with this singular attribute that in it the blessed cast no shade, observes, there is on this subject a passage in Plutarch so interesting and explanatory of the whole of this system that we shall cite it entire. Having observed that the theory of good and evil had at all times occupied the attention of naturalists and theologians, he adds, many suppose there are 2 gods of opposite inclinations, one delighting in good, the other in evil. The first of these is called particularly by the name of God, the second by that of genius or demon. Zoroaster has denominated them Oromes and Arimanes, and has said that of whatever falls under the cognizance of our senses, light is the best representative of the one and darkness and ignorance of the other. He adds that Mithra is an intermediate being, and it is for this reason that the Persians call Mithra the mediator or intercessor. The Persians also say that Oromes was born or formed out of the purest light, Ahrimanes, on the contrary, out of the thickest darkness, that Oromes made 6 gods as good as himself, and Ahrimans opposed to them 6 wicked ones. That afterwards Oromes trebled himself, Hermes Trismegistus, and removed to a distance remote from the earth, that he there formed stars, and among others Sirius, which he placed in the heavens as a guard and sentinel. He made also 24 other gods whom he enclosed in an egg. But Arimanes created an equal number who cracked the egg, and from that moment good and evil were mixed in the universe. But Arimanes is one day to be conquered, and the earth to be made equal and smooth, that all men may live happy. The Royal Arch Degree. The Royal Arch Degree seems not to have been known to what are called modern Masons as late as about 1750. That portion of the old Freemasons who met at the famous Apple Tree Tavern in 1717 and formed the society upon somewhat new principles, that is, so far as to admit into fellowship indiscriminately respectable individuals of all professions, were denominated by the non-adherents to this plan modern Masons. This affair caused the division of the Masonic Society into 2 parties, which continued till 1813, nearly 100 years. To the rivalry occasioned by this schism, Masonry, it is presumed, is mainly indebted for the great celebrity it has obtained in the world. It appears that the nonconformists to this new scheme, who considered themselves the orthodox party by rummaging among the old records of the order, first discovered the Royal Arch Degree, which had probably lain dormant for centuries, during which time it would appear the society had been confined almost exclusively to operative Masons, who continued the ceremonies only of the apprentice, fellowcraft or journeyman, and master mason, these being deemed appropriate to their occupation. This fact Dermot proves by the production of an answer of a Mr. Spencer, one of the Grand Secretaries of a lodge of modern Masons, to an application of W.C., a petitioner from Ireland, which is as follows: your being an ancient Mason, you are not entitled to any of our charity. The ancient Masons have a lodge at the 5 Bells in the Strand, and their secretary's name is Dermot. Our society is neither arch, royal arch, nor ancient, so that you have no right to partake of our charity. Such, says Dermot, was the character given of them by their own Grand Secretary about 14 years ago. Dermot published his book in 1764. If the knowledge communicated in this degree had not been recovered, the loss to the society would have been incalculable, provided its value be not overrated in the following estimation of it by Masonic writers. Webb says, "This degree is indescribably more august, sublime, and important than all which precede it, and is the summit and perfection of ancient Masonry. It impresses on our minds a belief of the being and existence of a supreme deity, without beginning of days or end of years, and reminds us of the reverence due to his holy name." Dermot calls it the root, heart, and marrow of Masonry. Cole adopts the following sentiment of a brother Mason. "In the Royal Arch Mason's degree, I beheld myself exalted to the top of Pisgah, an extensive scene open to my view of the glory and goodness of the most excellent High Priest of our salvation. I dug deep for hidden treasures, found them, and regained the omnic word." If we pass on to the Royal Arch, says the Reverend G. Oliver in his lectures on Freemasonry, we receive a wonderful accession of knowledge and find everything made perfect, for this is the ne plus ultra of Masonry and can never be exceeded by any human institution. By the manner in which this subject is treated, it would seem that a Mason is supposed to be ignorant of the existence of the one supreme being till admitted into the Royal Arch. This arises from copying after an institution established when this doctrine was not taught to the common people. Polytheism was the prevailing religion. The one supreme was revealed only to a select number who were initiated into the greater mysteries, the Royal Arch of the ancients. The members of this degree are denominated companions and are entitled to a full explanation of the mysteries of the order, whereas in the former degrees they are recognized by the common familiar appellation of brothers, and kept in a state of profound ignorance of the sublime secret which is disclosed in this chapter. This accords with the custom of Pythagoras, who thus distinguished his pupils. After a probation of 5 years, as before stated, they were admitted into the presence of the preceptor, called his companions, and permitted freely to converse with him. Previously to the expiration of that term, he delivered his instructions to them from behind a screen. The Royal Arch degree owes its title to the imaginary arch made in the heavens by the course of King Osiris, the sun, from the vernal to the autumnal equinox. The signs through which he passes in forming this semicircle, including those of the equinoxes, being 7, the number of grades or steps required to be taken by the Mason to entitle him to the honors of this degree. This order is called a chapter, which requires 9 officers, the principal of which are 3, who compose what is called the Grand Council, and 1 denominated captain of the host. There is, or should be, when convenient, an organ in the room in which the chapter is held. The companions enter the chapter in procession. At the entrance, each gives the sign of sorrow, which is done by bowing the head and body, placing the right hand on the forehead. This sign is repeated as they approach the altar. They then place their scepters in their left hands with the right on the left breast and make the following declaration. "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." The sign of sorrow is now given the 3rd time, and each advances to his proper place. They are so arranged as to form an arch or semicircle. The sorrow here expressed is an imitation of that of the ancients for the loss of the word, Logos or Osiris, personated by Hiram. The use of the organ agrees with the ancient manner of celebrating the orgies and is in accordance with the custom of the Pythagorean school. The semicircle formed by the companions confirms my opinion in regard to the name of this degree. The Grand Council consists of the most excellent high priest, king, and holy scribe. The high priest is dressed in a white robe with a breastplate of cut glass consisting of 12 pieces to represent the 12 signs of the zodiac, an apron, and a mitre. The king wears a scarlet robe, apron, and crown. The mitre and crown are generally made of pasteboard. Sometimes they are made of the most splendid materials, gold and silver velvet. But these are kept for public occasions. The mitre has the words "Holiness to the Lord" in gold letters across the forehead. The scribe wears a purple robe, apron, and turban. The color of the robes worn by the respective members of the Grand Council, the reader may be assured, has not been fixed upon through the mere fancy of the Masonic order. There must be a mythological authority to sanction it. The ancient astrologers, says the most learned of the Jews, Maimonides, having consecrated to each planet a color, an animal, a tree, a metal, a fruit, a plant, formed from them all a figure or representation of the star, taking care to select for the purpose a proper moment, a fortunate day, such as the conjunction or some other favorable aspect. They conceived that by their magic ceremonies they could introduce into those figures or idols the influence of the spirit by which they were modeled. These were the idols that the Chaldean Sabaeans adored, and in the performance of their worship they were obliged to be dressed in the proper color. Thus, the astrologers, by their practices, introduced idolatry, desirous of being regarded as the dispensers of the favors of heaven. The Egyptians, says Porphyry, call Kneph the intelligence or efficient cause of the universe. They represent him under the form of a man in deep blue, the color of the sky, having in his hand a scepter, a belt round his body, and a small bonnet royal of light feathers on his head to denote how very subtle and fugacious the idea of that being is. Upon which I shall observe that Knoph in Hebrew signifies a wing, a feather, and that this color of sky blue is to be found in the majority of the Indian gods and is under the name of Narayan, one of their most distinguished epithets. Porphyry, I presume, is mistaken in supposing this god dressed in blue to be Kneph, for as he was the supreme god of the Egyptians, his proper dress would be white. The Roman Catholic cardinals, says Mr. Buck in his Theological Dictionary, dress in scarlet to signify that they ought to be ready to shed their blood for the faith and church when the defense and honor of either require it. This, I imagine, is a mere conjecture and not founded in fact. The custom has, doubtless, an astronomical bearing. The Pope on gala days is clothed in a white robe wearing a golden mitre and is seated on his white throne, and as the cardinals are second in rank, like the king in the royal arch, their appropriate colour is no doubt scarlet. The habit required for the person representing the sun in the Dorian mysteries, says Taylor, is thus described in the Orphic verses, preserved by Macrobius in the first book of his Saturnalia, chapter 18. He who desires in pomp of sacred dress the sun's resplendent body to express should first a veil assume of purple bright, like fair white beams combined with fiery light. On his right shoulder next a mule's broad hide, widely diversified with spotted pride, should hang, an image of the pole divine and diademed stars whose orbs eternal shine. A golden splendid zone then over the vest he next should throw, and bind it round his breast in mighty token how with golden light the rising sun from earth's last bounds and night sudden emerges, and with matchless force darts through old ocean's billows in his course. A boundless splendor hence enshrined in dew plays on his whirlpools glorious to the view, while his circumambient waters spread abroad full in the presence of the radiant God. But ocean's circle like a zone of light the sun's wide bosom girds and charms the wondering sight. Eleusinian and Bacchic Mysteries, page 160. The officers and companions of the chapter being stationed, the high priest says, "Companions, I am about to open a chapter of Royal Archmasons and will thank you for your attention and assistance. If there is any person present who is not a Royal Archmason, he is requested to retire. Companion Captain of the Host, the first care of congregated Masons, Captain, to see the tabernacle duly guarded. High Priest, attend to that part of your duty." The captain of the host stations the guard at the outside of the door, gives him his orders, closes the door and makes an alarm of 3 times 3 on the inside to ascertain that the guard is on his post. The guard answers by 9 corresponding raps. The captain then gives 1 and the guard does the same. He then reports that the chapter is duly guarded by a companion of this degree at the outer avenue with a drawn sword in his hand. The high priest then gives 2 raps with his gavel and asks the following questions. "Captain of the host, are you a Royal Archmason?" "I am that I am." "How shall I know you to be a Royal Archmason?" "By 3 times 3. He thus proceeds, as is done in the other degrees, to demand the stations and duties of the officers of the chapter, which are as follows. The captain of the host is stationed at the right hand of the Grand Council to receive their orders and see them duly executed. The station of the principal sojourner is at the left hand of the Grand Council. to bring the blind by a way they know not, to lead them in paths they have not known, to make darkness light before them, and crooked things straight. In the lower degrees, the duty of messenger, as well as that of regulating and conducting the ceremonies, is performed by two officers who are denominated deacons. These, like the rest of the Masonic drama, I find to be astronomical characters. The ancient Egyptians, says the astrologer Julius Firmicus, divide each sign of the zodiac into 3 sections, and each section was under the direction of an imaginary being whom they called decan, or chief of 10, so that there were 3 decans in a month and 36 in a year. Now these decans, who were also called gods, theoi, regulated the destinies of mankind and were placed particularly in certain stars. In the course of time, a trifling variation in the orthography of the name of these officers, admitting of little or none in the pronunciation, has taken place. The duties of the deacons and those of the deacons are sufficiently allied to identify them. Among the Greeks, those youths who served the tables were called diakonoi, deacons, that is, ministers' attendants. The duties of the 2 last mentioned officers in the ancient mysteries appertain to one character, Mercury, who was the messenger of the gods and the conductor of souls to the other world through the dark regions below. The royal arch, like the greater mysteries, contains a scenical representation of a journey from this world to the next. In the way are 4 guarded passes called veils, emblematical of the equinoxes and solstices, allegorically denominated gates of heaven, through which lies the sun's course. 3 of the officers stationed at these passes are called Grand Masters of the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd veil, who require certain tokens and passwords of the candidates on their admission through them. The 4th officer is styled Royal Arch Captain. He is stationed at the inner veil or entrance of the Sanctum Sanctorum to guard the same and see that none pass but such as are duly qualified and have the proper passwords and signet of truth. The colors of their several banners are the 1st blue, the 2nd purple, the 3rd red, and the 4th white, which have the same astronomical reference as the dresses of the Grand Council. The white banner, as Masonry asserts, is emblematical of that purity of heart and rectitude of conduct which is essential to obtain admission into the divine Sanctum Sanctorum above. In the duty assigned to the Royal Arch Captain, there is evidently an allusion to that required of the severe and incorruptible boatman, Charon, who was prohibited from transporting souls across the lake or river Acheron to the Elysian fields, the heaven of the ancients, without the signet of the judges, who were appointed to examine into the characters of the deceased and to allow or withhold their permission accordingly. To arrive at Tartarus or Elysium, souls were obliged to cross the rivers Styx and Acheron in the boat of the ferryman Charon, and to pass through the gates of horn or ivory, guarded by the dog Cerberus. 9 companions must be present at the opening of a Royal Arch chapter. Not more nor less than 3 are permitted to take this degree at the same time. The candidates are prepared by tying a bandage over their eyes and coiling a rope 7 times round the body of each, which unites them together, with 3 feet of slack rope between them. Thus prepared, they are led into the Royal Arch chapter, which they are told is dedicated to enlighten those that are in darkness, and to show forth the way, the truth, and the life. On entering the chapter, they pass under what is called a living arch, which is formed by a number of companions arranging themselves on both sides of the door, each joining hands with the one opposite to himself. The conductor says, "Stoop low, brothers. Remember that he that humbleth himself shall be exalted. Stoop low, brothers, stoop low. We are about to enter the arch, which is raised up for him, but lowered when the candidates come under it." They seldom pass the first pair of hands without being obliged to support themselves on their hands and knees. Their progress may well be imagined to be very slow, for notwithstanding their humble condition, they are under the necessity of sustaining on their backs nearly the whole weight of the living arch above. The conductor, to encourage them, calls out occasionally, "Stoop low, brothers, stoop low." If they go too slow to suit the companions, it is not unusual for someone to apply a sharp point to their bodies to urge them on. After they have endured this humiliating exercise as long as suits the convenience of the companions, they pass from under the living arch. The reader will readily perceive that this scene is an imitation of the trials of the greater mysteries, and although a faint one, the likeness is too apparent to be mistaken. It was anciently a religious rite, and the ceremony has outlived the principle that produced it. Having got through the arch, the candidates are conducted once round the chapter and directed to kneel at the altar to receive the obligation. The principal sojourner then thus addresses them: "Brethren, as you advance in Masonry, your obligation becomes more binding. You are now kneeling at the altar for the 7th time and about to take a solemn oath or obligation. If you are willing to proceed, say after me. I, A.B. of my own free will and accord, in presence of Almighty God, and this chapter of Royal Archmasons, erected to God and dedicated to Zerubbabel, do hereby, etc." At the conclusion of the oath, the candidates kiss the book 7 times. Here the farce of dedication to St. John, which was originally intended as a sheer hoax upon the mystics of the minor degrees, is no longer continued. I shall hereafter endeavor to analyze the name of Zerubbabel. The candidates are now conducted once round the chapter and directed to kneel, while the sojourner reads a prayer. See Webb's Monitor, page 134. After prayer, the principal sojourner says, "Companions, arise and follow me." He conducts them once round the chapter, during which time he reads from Exodus 3, 1-6. "Now Moses kept the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the backside of the desert, and came to the mountain of God, even Horeb. And the angel of the Lord appeared unto him in a flame of fire, out of the midst of the bush. And he looked, and behold, the bush burned with fire, and the bush was not consumed." By the time this reading is ended, the candidates have arrived in front of a representation of the burning bush, placed in a corner of the chapter, when the principal sojourner directs them to halt and slips up the bandage from their eyes. A companion who performs this part of the scene, viz. Personating deity, steps behind the burning bush and calls out vehemently, "Moses, Moses!" The principal sojourner answers for the candidates, "Here am I." The companion behind the bush exclaims still more vehemently, "Draw not nigh hither, put off thy shoes from off thy feet, for the place where thou standest is holy ground." Their shoes are now taken off. "I am the God of thy fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." The principal sojourner then directs them to kneel down and cover their faces, and says, "And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look upon God." The principal sojourner then says to the candidates, "Arise and follow me," and leads them 3 times round the chapter, during which time he reads from 2 Chronicles, chapter 36, verses 11-20. The terror in which the initiated into the ancient mysteries were thrown by the counterfeiting of thunder, lightning, etc., is here imitated. This occurs after the words, "and break down the walls of Jerusalem." The companions then make a tremendous noise by firing pistols, clashing swords, overturning chairs, rolling cannonballs across the floor, etc. The candidates, being blindfolded, must of course be surprised and terrified at such a scene. In the meantime, the candidates are thrown down, bound, and dragged out into the preparation room, and the door closed. On being brought again into the chapter, they pass under the living arch. This is formed on one side of the hall or chapter. On the other side is what is called the rugged road, which is generally made of blocks of wood, old chairs, benches, etc. The conductor consoles the candidates by observing, "This is the way many great and good men have traveled before you," never deeming it derogatory to their dignity to level themselves with the fraternity. "I have often traveled this road from Babylon to Jerusalem, and generally find it rough and rugged. However, I think I never saw it much smoother than it is at the present time." By this time, the candidates have stumbled over the rugged road and arrived again at the entrance of the living arch. The conductor says, "Companions, there is a very difficult and dangerous pass ahead which lies directly in our way. Before we attempt to pass it, we must kneel down and pray. Sundry prayers and passages of Scripture are recited before the rugged path is got rid of. There are clauses in one of them which make it appear that it was originally addressed to the Sun when in the lower hemisphere, imploring his return to the upper regions, as follows: "Hear my prayer, O Lord. Give ear to my supplications, for the enemy hath persecuted my soul. He hath made me to travail in darkness. Therefore is my spirit overwhelmed within me. My heart within me is desolate. Hear me speedily, O Lord, my spirit faileth. Hide not thy face from me, lest I be like unto them that go down into the pit. Cause me to hear thy loving kindness in the morning, for in thee do I trust. Bring my soul out of trouble, and of thy mercy cut off my enemies, for I am thy servant. The most appropriate prayer as regards the mysteries of Masonry is perhaps that recorded by Dermot, which is used in the Lodge of Jewish Freemasons. O Lord, excellent art thou in thy truth, and there is nothing great in comparison to thee, for thine is the praise from all the works of thy hands forevermore. Enlighten us, we beseech thee, in the truth knowledge of Masonry, by the sorrows of Adam, thy first made man, by the blood of Abel, the Holy One, by the righteousness of Seth, in whom thou art well pleased, and by thy covenant with Noah, in whose architecture thou wast pleased to save the seed of thy beloved. Number us not among those that know not thy statutes, nor the divine mysteries of the secret Kabbalah. Kabbal or Kabbalah is a secret science, professed by the Hebrew rabbins concerning the allegorical interpretation of the Bible. But grant, we beseech thee, that the ruler of this lodge may be endued with knowledge and wisdom to instruct us and explain his secret mysteries, as our holy brother Moses did in his lodge to Aaron, to Eleazar and Ithamar, the sons of Aaron, and the 70 elders of Israel. In the preface to the Mishnah, we find this tradition of the Jews, explained as follows. God not only delivered the law to Moses on Mount Sinai, but the explanation of it likewise. When Moses came down from the mount and entered into his tent, Aaron went to visit him, and Moses acquainted Aaron with the laws he had received from God, together with the explanation of them. After this, Aaron placed himself at the right hand of Moses, and Eleazar and Ithamar, the sons of Aaron, were admitted, to whom Moses repeated what he had just before told to Aaron. These being seated, the one on the right hand, the other on the left hand of Moses, the 70 elders of Israel who composed the Sanhedrin came in, and Moses again declared the same laws to them, with the interpretation of them, as he had done before to Aaron and his sons. Lastly, all who pleased of the common people were invited to enter, and Moses instructed them likewise in the same manner as the rest, so that Aaron heard 4 times what Moses had been taught by God upon Mount Sinai, Eleazar and Ithamar 3 times, the 70 elders twice, and the people once. Moses afterwards reduced the laws which he had received into writing, but not the explanations of them. These he thought it sufficient to trust to the memories of the above-mentioned persons who, being perfectly instructed in them, delivered them to their children, and these again to theirs from age to age. And grant that we may understand, learn, and keep all the statutes and commandments of the Lord and this holy mystery, pure and undefiled unto our lives' end. Amen, Lord. The candidates, after having passed the 4 veils by giving the signs and passwords appropriated to each, are admitted into the presence of the Grand Council by means of a signet, being a triangular piece of metal with the word Zerubbabel engraved upon it. I have had the curiosity to look into the derivation and meaning of the word Zerubbabel. As it is a compounded word, some of its compounds are of course abbreviated. Zer, it is likely, is a contraction of Zera, which means east, brightness. Uber is probably a corruption of Abba, father, which the deity is sometimes styled, and Bel is well known to mean the sun, or Lord. Zerubbabel is defined as dispersion or confusion. What could more clearly point out the glorious luminary of day rising in the east and dispersing the clouds and darkness? His seal ought, of course, to entitle the bearer to admittance into the sanctum sanctorum. Finally, the Grand Council, being satisfied as to the pretensions of the candidates, directs them to repair to the northwest corner of the ruins of the old temple and commence removing the rubbish to lay the foundation of the new. The reader will remember that it was in the northwest that the deity was supposed to have commenced his operations in the erection of the world. While thus engaged, they discover a secret vault in which is found the keystone of the arch, which, by the by, had already been put in its place in the preceding degree. This circumstance, as well as that of the password Rabboni being the same in the most excellent master's degree as in this, shows, as noticed by Mr. Cole, the intimate connection between the two degrees. On a second descent of one of the party, he discovers a small box or chest standing on a pedestal, curiously wrought and overlaid with gold. He involuntarily found his hand raised to guard his eyes from the intense light and heat reflected from it. This proved to be the ark containing the lost word logos or sun, which accounts for the intense light and heat reflected from it. It contained also the book of the law, Aaron's rod, a pot of manna, and a key to the ineffable characters of this degree. The god of day, personified in the sacred allegories, was subjected to all the destinies of man. He had his cradle and his tomb under the names of Hercules, Bacchus, Osiris, etc. He was an infant at the winter solstice at the moment when the day began to increase. It was under this form that his image was exposed in the ancient temples, there to receive the homage of his adorers. Because then, says Macrobius, the day being the shortest, this god seemed to be but a feeble child. This is the child of the mysteries, he whose image the Egyptians drew from the bottom of their sanctuaries every year on a fixed day. Here is the original of the drawing up, from beneath the foundation of Solomon's temple, of the omnific, all-creating word logos or sun. The candidates passing under the living arch, also the descent of a companion into the vault of the 9 arches. This ark of masonry is but a copy of the old mysterious chest of the ancient Egyptians, which, among other monuments of the ancient state of mankind, contained acorns, heads of poppies, bayberries, branches of fig tree, etc., which, like the manna of the Jews, are said to have served as their main sustenance in the early ages of the world. Although the Masons pretend to inherit Aaron's rod, in their hands it has lost its miraculous powers. And as to the book of the law, by which modern Masons at least mean the law of Moses, it was not in the Jewish ark. For according to 1 Kings 8:9, there was nothing in the ark save the 2 tables of stone. The following questions and answers occur in what is called lectures, after the ceremonies of initiation are past, which are in fact statements of what had been before detailed. I have endeavored to avoid repetitions by previously omitting part of what takes place at initiations. After receiving the obligation, what was said to you? We were told that we were now obligated and received as royal archmasons. But as this degree was infinitely more important than any of the preceding, it was necessary for us to pass through many trials and to travel in rough and ragged ways to prove our fidelity before we could be entrusted with the more important secrets of this degree. We were further told that, though we could not discover the path we were to travel, we were under the direction of a faithful guide who would bring the blind by a way they know not, and lead them in paths they had not known, who would make darkness light before them and crooked things straight, who would do these things and not forsake them. Follow your leader and fear no danger. Let your advance be by 7 solemn steps, and at each step you must halt and make obeisance, with the awe and reverence suited to this grand and solemn occasion, for every step brings you nearer to the sacred name of God. The following remarks of Plato in his Phaedon, or dialogue on the immortality of the soul, will tend to explain the inference intended to be drawn from the above passage by showing the idea entertained by the ancients in regard to the difficulties to be encountered in the journey to the other world, to which the extract from Isaiah is here made to apply. If the soul is immortal, it stands in need of cultivation and improvement, not only in the time that we call the time of life, but for the future, or what we call the time of eternity. For if you think justly upon this point, you will find it very dangerous to neglect the soul. Were death the dissolution of the whole man, it would be a great advantage to the wicked after death to be rid at once of their body, their soul, and their vices. But forasmuch as the soul is immortal, the only way to avoid those evils and obtain salvation is to become good and wise. For it carries nothing along with it, but its good or bad actions, and its virtues or vices, which are the cause of its eternal happiness or misery, commencing from the first minute of its arrival in the other world. And it is said that after the death of every individual person, the demon or genius that was partner with it and conducted it during life leads it to a certain place where all the dead are obliged to appear in order to be judged, and from thence are conducted by a guide to the world below. And after they have there received their good or bad deserts and continued there their appointed time, another conductor brings them back to this life after several revolutions of ages. Now this road is not a plain road, else there would be no occasion for guides and nobody missed their way. But there are several byways and crossways, as I conjecture from the method of their sacrifices and religious ceremonies, so that a temperate wise soul follows its guide and is not ignorant of what happens to it. But the soul that is nailed to its body, that is inflamed with the love of it and has been long its slave after much struggling and suffering in this visible world, is at last dragged along against its will by the demon allotted for its guide. And when it arrives at that fatal rendezvous of all souls, if it has been guilty of any impurity or polluted with murder or has committed any of those atrocious crimes that desperate and lost souls are commonly guilty of, the other souls abhor it and avoid its company. It finds neither companion nor guide, but wanders in a fearful solitude and horrible desert, till after a certain time necessity drags it into the mansions it deserves. Whereas the temperate and pure soul has the gods themselves for its guides and conductors and goes to cohabit with them in the mansions of pleasure prepared for it. What further was said to you? The high priest first read the following passage, Exodus 6:2-3. And God spake unto Moses and said unto him, I am the Lord, and I appeared unto Abraham, unto Isaac, and unto Jacob by the name of God Almighty, but by my name Jehovah was I not known to them. He then informed us that the name of deity, the divine Logos, or word to which reference is had in John, in the beginning was the word Logos, and the word was with God, and the word was God. The same was in the beginning with God. All things were made by him, and without him was not anything made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men, and the light shineth in darkness, and the darkness comprehended it not. That this Logos or word was anciently written only in these sacred characters, bowing to them, and thus preserved from one generation to another. That this was the true Masonic word, which was lost in the death of Hiram Abif, and was restored at the building of the temple, in the manner we had at that time assisted to represent. Here the whole mystery of Masonry is unveiled. Here is a candid confession of what the Masons had been so long in search of, which proves to be the lost Logos, the second person in the pagan trinity. Logos is the same as Osiris, the sun, considered as the demiurgus, the maker of the world, under the direction of the Supreme Being. It has been asserted by Dr. Priestley and others that the above passage in John is an interpolation, and the use here made of it by an institution derived from paganism corroborates the fact. Those who believe that the Logos was the personification of the divine intellect, or of the divine attributes of wisdom, power, etc., trace this doctrine to the ancient Platonists, from whom, as they conceive, it was adopted by the Christian fathers. In the writings of Plato, Logos has two acceptations, viz., those of speech and of reason, such as is found in man. But when this philosopher speaks of nous or Logos as something distinct from the divine being himself, as a power or property belonging to him, and all divine powers and properties being substance, it would be very natural and easy to transform this divine power into a substantial person. And this we shall find to have been the case with respect to the latter Platonists, agreeably to one of the Platonic maxims, viz., that being and energy are the same thing. Never any philosophy was so fashionable as that of Plato during the first ages of the Church. The pagans interested themselves amongst all the different sects of philosophers, but the conformity which Plato's was found to have with religion made almost all the knowing Christians of that sect. Thence came the mighty esteem they had of Plato. They looked upon him as a sort of prophet who had foretold many important points of Christianity, especially that of the Holy Trinity. Nay, they went so far as to take his works for comments on the Scripture, and to conceive the nature of the Word as he conceived it. He represented God so elevated above his creatures that he did not believe that they were immediately made by his hands, and therefore he put between them and him this word as a degree by which the actions of God might pass down to them. The Christians had the like idea of Jesus Christ, and this may perhaps be the reason why no heresy has been more generally received and maintained with greater heat than Arianism. This Platonism then, which seems to honor the Christian religion by countenancing it, was very full of notions about demons, and thence they easily passed into that opinion which the old Christians had of oracles. Plato said that demons were of a middle nature between God and man, that they were the aerial genii appointed to hold a commerce between God and us, that although they were near us, yet we could not see them, that they penetrated into all our thoughts, that they had a love for the good and a hatred for the bad, and that it was for their honor that such variety of sacrifices and so many different ceremonies were appointed. But it does not at all appear that Plato acknowledged any evil demons to which might be attributed the management of the illusions of oracles. Plutarch, notwithstanding, assures us that Plato was not ignorant of them, and amongst the Platonic philosophers the thing is out of doubt. Eusebius, in his evangelical preparations, recites a great number of passages out of Porphyry, where that pagan philosopher assures us that evil demons are the authors of enchantments, philters, and witchcrafts, that they cheat our eyes with specters, phantoms, and apparitions, that lying is essential to their nature, that they raise in us the greatest part of our passions, and that they have an ambition to pass with us for gods, that their aerial and spiritual bodies are nourished with suffumigations, and with the blood and fat of sacrifices, and that it is only these that employ themselves in giving oracles, and to whom this task so full of fraud is assigned. In short, at the head of the troop of evil demons he places Hecate and Serapis. Jamblichus, another Platonist, has said as much, and the greatest part of these things being true, the Christians received them all with joy, and have added to them besides a little of their own, as for example, that the demons stole from the writings of the prophets some knowledge of things to come, and so got honor by it in their oracles. This system of the ancient Christians had this advantage, that it discovered to the pagans, by their own principles, the original of their false worship, and the source of those errors which they always embraced. They were persuaded that there was something supernatural in their oracles, and the Christians, who were always disputing against them, did not desire to confute this opinion. Thus, by demons, which both parties believed to be concerned in the oracles, they explicated all that was supernatural in them. They acknowledged indeed that this sort of ordinary miracles were wrought in the pagan religion. But then they ruined this advantage again, by imputing them to such authors as evil spirits. And this way of convincing was more short and easy than to contradict the miracle itself, by a long train of inquiries and arguments. Thus I have given you the manner how that opinion which the first ages of the Church had of the pagan oracles was grounded. I might, to the three reasons which I have already brought, add a fourth, of no less authority perhaps than those, that is, that in the supposition of oracles being given by demons there is something miraculous. And if we consider the humor of mankind a little, we shall find how much we are taken with anything that is miraculous. But I do not intend to enlarge myself on this reflection, for those that think upon it will easily believe me, and those that do not will perhaps give it no credit, notwithstanding all my arguments. The physical properties of the sun are plainly set forth in the extract from John. The language is in the mystic style of the Platonic school, and not in the plain, simple manner of the Gospel writers, but notwithstanding, if put in the shape of interrogatory, what is that which contains the principles that produce life and is at the same time the light of men? It would not form a conundrum difficult of solution. The light shineth in darkness, and the darkness comprehended it not, alludes to a time past when the sun was enveloped with clouds in either of the tropics, and his extrication and triumph over Typhon, the prince of darkness, was the very cause of the celebration here imitated by the Masons. Besides, it is said, that was the true light, which lighteth every man that cometh into the world. No, this could not properly be said of Christ, as it would not apply to those who never heard of his name, but is very applicable to the sun, which lighteth everyone in all parts of the earth. Mr. Dupuy, taking for granted that the above passages are genuine, that is, actually written by St. John, makes great account of them, as well he might, to prove that Christ and the Son are the same, and consequently that Christianity is sun worship. He says the theology of Orpheus taught that light, the most ancient and the most sublime of all beings, is God, that inaccessible God who envelops all things in his substance and who is called reason, conseil, light and life. These theological ideas have been copied by the evangelist John when he said that the life was the light, and that the light was the God, and that the light was the word or the reason and the wisdom of God. Again, the Gebras still at this day reverence the light as the most beautiful attribute of the divinity. Fire, say they, produced the light, and the light is God. This is the ethereal fire, in which ancient theology placed the substance of the divinity, or universal soul of the world, from whence emanates light and life, or to use the expressions of the Christians, the Logos, or the Word, which lighteth every man that cometh into the world, and giveth life to all beings. But admitting the passages above, quoted from St. John's Gospel, to be interpolations, as I believe has been made evident, the argument of Dupuy on this head falls to the ground. There is much confusion, after all, in regard to the omnific word. Whether this was created by the original founders of the order for the purpose of deception or has been introduced by modern Masons is unknown. After declaring the Logos to be the recovered long-lost word, another compound name intended to bear the same import is substituted in its place. This the English Masons call Jaubul-on and the American Masons Jabul-lun. They both say the word is compounded of the names of deity in three languages, Hebrew, Chaldean and Syriac, leaving Egypt, the mother of the mysteries from which Masonry is derived, out of the question, although On, which composes part of the compound word used by English Masons, was one of the names of the deity, peculiar to that country. Neither Bu nor Lun, it is believed, was ever the name of a deity in any language. And although the sun was worshipped under the symbolical figure of the bull, either on account of his great use in agriculture or because the celestial sign of the bull was formerly in the vernal equinox at the opening of the year, yet it is evident that the bull was looked upon merely as a symbol and not as actually constituting the name of the supreme being, whereas Jabelon were permanent names universally and at all times bestowed upon the deity by one or other of the nations above mentioned. The chief varieties of this sacred name of God amongst the inhabitants of different nations, says Oliver, were Jabel or Baal and On or Om. Bel or Baal, says Mayer, was the same god with Moloch. Their names, both of which signify the king, the Lord, are titles applicable to the sun. It is not permitted to utter this omnific word above the breath, and 3 companions are required to perform it, each pronouncing a syllable alternately. And admitting Jabelon to be the word, one would say Ja, another Bel, and the third On, and then interchangeably until each had pronounced the whole compound. A similar superstition prevails among the Jews in regard to what is called the Tetragrammaton, or word of 4 letters, which in Hebrew compose the name Jehovah. The Jews, however, are not permitted to pronounce this name even by dividing the syllables in the manner of the companions of Royal Arch-Masonry. The very attribute given to the lost word, omnific, all-creating, indicates the Demiurgus, the creator of the world, which, as before observed, was believed by the ancients to be the sun. It was of no importance to investigate the composition of the omnific word of Masonry any further than to show that in all the movements of the order, the sun is kept constantly in view, and that the lost Master Mason's word meant nothing but the lost influence of that luminary, when in his greatest northern or southern declination. But to return to the lecture, it is stated by the candidates that the high priest placed crowns upon their heads and told them they were now invested with all the important secrets of this degree, crowned and received as worthy companions, Royal Arch-Masons. This custom, it has been shown, is not without authority or precedent in the ancient mysteries. I will repeat from Dupuy the purport and end of the mysteries. The mystagogues make darkness and light successively to appear before the eyes of the initiates. Night, the most obscure, accompanied with frightful spectres, is replaced by a brilliant day whose light environs the statue of the divinity. This sanctuary is approached with trembling, where all was prepared to exhibit the spectacle of Tartarus and Elysium. It is in this last stage that the initiated, being ultimately inducted, perceives the picture of beautiful prairies enlightened by a clear sky. There he hears harmonious voices and the charming songs of the sacred choirs. It is then that, become absolutely free and disfranchised from all evil, he mixes with the crowd of the initiates, and when his head being crowned with flowers, he celebrates the holy orgies with them. Thus the ancients represented here below, in their initiations, that which would, they said, one day happen to souls when they should be disengaged from bodies and drawn from the obscure prison in which destiny had enchained them, in uniting them to terrestrial matter. As this crowning is the closing ceremony of initiations into the mysteries, so is its imitation in the royal arch included in the last act of the drama of ancient Freemasonry. The following address, copied from Webb's Freemason's Monitor, is delivered to the newly initiated companion. Worthy companion, by the consent and assistance of the members of this chapter, you are now exalted to the sublime and honorable degree of a Royal Archmason. Having attained this degree, you have arrived at the summit and perfection of ancient Masonry, and are consequently entitled to a full explanation of the mysteries of the order. The rites and mysteries developed in this degree have been handed down through a chosen few, unchanged by time and uncontrolled by prejudice, and we expect and trust they will be regarded by you with the same veneration and transmitted with the same scrupulous purity to your successors. No one can reflect on the ceremonies of gaining admission into this place without being forcibly struck with the important lessons which they teach. Here we are necessarily led to contemplate with gratitude and admiration the sacred source from whence all earthly comforts flow. Here we find additional inducements to continue steadfast and immovable in the discharge of our respective duties. And here we are bound by the most solemn ties to promote each other's welfare and correct each other's failings by advice, admonition, and reproof. I shall conclude the notice of this chapter with a few remarks on the jewel and badge of the order. The following is an abridgment of a description given by Carlyle. The jewel is composed of two intersecting triangles, surrounding another triangle with the sun in the center, an emblem of the deity, or rather a deity itself. Under these is the compound character, seen here, the triple tau, triple T, which is the Royal Archmason's badge, by which the wearer acknowledges himself the servant of the true God. The T, it has been seen, is the figure of the old Egyptian nilometer used to ascertain the height of the inundation on which depended the subsistence, the life of the inhabitants. The nilometer, in consequence, became the symbol of life, health, and prosperity, and was supposed to possess the power of averting evil. It was therefore, in an abbreviated form, suspended to the necks of the sick as an amulet or charm. The letter T, Tan, was used by captains and heralds and signed on their names who remained alive after a battle. As the letter Theta was used as a mark of death, so was T of life. Thus has originated the badge of Royal Archmasonry. Its triple form, as usual, relates to the Egyptian Trinity. It is generally conceded by Masonic writers that ancient Masonry closes with the Royal Arch. In an edition of the Illustrations of Masonry by the late Mr. Preston, published in London, 1829, the editor, Mr. Oliver, author of the lectures from which quotations have been made above, observes, "All degrees beyond the Royal Arch ought to be carefully separated from genuine Masonry, as they are mostly founded on vague and uncertain traditions, which possess not the shadow of authority to recommend them to our notice. The additional degrees, including those considered legitimate, amount to upwards of 50. These are founded partly upon astronomical principles, agreeing with the ancient worship of the Egyptians, and partly upon the Hebrew and Christian doctrines, of two or three of which a slight notice will be taken. It may be remarked in general that many of the degrees of knights are founded on the Christian knighthoods, got up in the time of the Crusades, in the 12th century, and that the ceremonies thereof are an imitation of those superstitious establishments. A former Grand High Priest of the chapters in the state of New York informs me that he initiated a French gentleman into the degree of Knight of Malta, who told him he was a member of the ancient order of that name, and that the ceremonies were very similar. At the time those old knighthoods were founded, superstition mingled in every public and private action of life. In the holy wars, it sanctified the profession of arms, and the order of chivalry was assimilated in its rights and privileges to the sacred orders of priesthood. The bath and the white garment of the novice were an indecent copy of the regeneration of baptism. His sword, which he offered on the altar, was blessed by the ministers of religion. His solemn reception was preceded by fasts and vigils, and he was created a knight in the name of God, of St. George, and of St. Michael the Archangel. Order of High Priesthood. The ancient priests of Egypt and the Druids of Gaul and Britain, of course, officiated in the administration of the mysteries. Soon after Druidism was extinct, it is probable the Royal Arch was neglected and lay dormant for several centuries. On its revival, about the middle of the 18th century, it was found that priests, or persons to officiate as such, were necessary to preside in this chapter. Accordingly, they were chosen from the laity among the brethren, or from such clergymen as had joined themselves to the order, and there were doctors of divinity among the first promoters of the revival or revolution of the society. Here the English clergy had an opportunity, which they did not neglect, to mold the ceremonies connected with the order of priesthood to suit their purpose. The odious tithe system is openly advocated, and the awful fate of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram held out as the due punishment of all those who should dare to resist it. The following remarks upon this subject are abstracted from Cross and Webb. This order appertains to the office of High Priest of a Royal Arch chapter. It should not be conferred when less than 3 high priests are present. Whenever the ceremony is performed in due and ample form, the assistance of at least 9 high priests is requisite. A convention notified to meet at the time of any communication of the Grand Chapter will afford the best opportunity of conferring this important and exalted degree of Masonry, with appropriate solemnity. The reading of the following passages of Scripture composes a part of the ceremonies appertaining to this order. The first passage read is the 14th chapter of Genesis, relating to the successful expedition of Abram against certain kings, and on his return giving to Melchizedek tithes of all he had obtained. A reference is then made to Hebrews 7 verses 1 to 6, wherein it is said, "This Melchizedek, king of Salem, which is king of peace, was without father, without mother, without descent, having neither beginning of days nor end of life, but abideth a priest continually." Now consider how great this man was, unto whom even the patriarch Abraham gave the 10th of the spoils. And verily they that are of the sons of Levi, who receive the office of the priesthood, have a commandment to take tithe of the people according to the law, that is, of their brethren. Now this alludes particularly to the Levitical law, and had a special reference to that portion of the tribe of Levi who were admitted into the sacerdotal order, and is totally inapplicable to the Christian dispensation. It was a peace offering of St. Paul, the author of the book of Hebrews, to the Jewish priests to prevent their persecution, for surely the apostle did not pretend to the right of demanding tithes of the Christian laity of his day, for he boasts of having been of no charge to them, laboring for his own support. The English clergy, however, claim the benefit of this law and have duped the Masons into an acknowledgement of their pretensions. The next passage cited is Numbers 16 verses 1 to 33, which gives the horrid catastrophe of Korah and company for resisting Moses and Aaron. This example is evidently adduced to deter the laity of England from opposing the tithes claimers, the would-be legitimate heirs of the sons of Levi who receive the price of the priesthood. Moses here accuses the body of the Levites of seeking the priesthood and asks, "What is Aaron, that ye murmur against him?" Which shows that tithes were the bone of contention, even in the time of Moses, the priesthood obtaining a greater share in proportion to their numbers than the rest of the tribe. The passage concludes as follows: "And it came to pass, as he, Moses, had made an end of speaking all these words, that the ground clave asunder that was under them, and the earth opened her mouth and swallowed them up, and the houses, and all the men that appertained unto Korah, and all their goods. They and all that appertained to them went down alive into the pit, and the earth closed upon them, and they perished from among the congregation. The American Masons ought at least to have so modified the ordination of priests into the order as to render it consistent with our republican institutions, and not given the least countenance to the iniquitous exaction of clerical tithes. It may be said that there is no immediate cause of alarm on this head. Yet the reiterated admission of such a claim by a numerous respectable society may in time be the means of rendering it popular. It may be remarked that Christian clergymen who are inducted into this order assume the duties of pagan priests, and of course perform ceremonies appropriate to the worship of the heavenly bodies, all the host of heaven. This, to be sure, may be done very innocently, as they are not necessarily diverted from the integrity of their faith, and moreover are probably not aware of the real import of the rites and ceremonies in which they participate. After the election of a candidate to the office of high priest, he is thus addressed by the Grand High Priest. You are appointed chaplain to this chapter, and I now invest you with this circular jewel, the badge of your office. It is emblematical of eternity and reminds us that here is not our abiding place, etc. Now we have seen that a circle, owing to its figure, was esteemed by the ancients a symbol of their god, the sun. Let the mitre with which you are invested remind you of the dignity of the office you sustain, and its inscription impress upon your mind a sense of your dependence upon God, etc. The inscription upon it is holiness to the Lord, the same as that which surrounds the mitre of the Hierophant of the Mysteries, and also that of the Roman Pontiff. The breastplate with which you are decorated is in imitation of that upon which were engraved the names of the 12 tribes and worn by the high priest of Israel, etc. The breastplate is the same as that worn by the hierophants of Egypt, which had described upon it the 12 signs of the zodiac. Volney, in taking notice of some customs of the Hebrews, which are also strictly Masonic, observes, "In vain did Moses prescribe the worship of the symbols which prevailed in Lower Egypt and Phoenicia. In vain did he wish to blot from his religion everything which had relation to the stars. Many traits call them to mind in spite of all he has done." He cites, as instances, the 7 luminaries or planets of the great candlestick, the 12 stones or signs in the Urim of the high priest, and the feast of the 2 equinoxes, entrances and gates of the 2 hemispheres. The various colors of the robes you wear are emblematical of every grace and virtue which can adorn and beautify the human mind. The various colors of the robes of the high priest are symbolical of the seasons when the sun is in the different constellations of the zodiac. "Ye priests," says Volney, alluding to Catholic priests, "you wear the sun's emblems all over your bodies. Your tonsure is the disk of the sun, your stole is his zodiac, your rosaries are symbols of the stars and planets. Ye pontiffs and prelates, your mitre, your crozier, your mantle are those of Osiris." Although after the extinction of Druidism, it was necessary for Masonry to create an order of priests to officiate in the Royal Arch Chapter as representatives of the deity, still it is evident that the English clergy, who undoubtedly took a principal part in arranging the ceremonies appropriated to initiations into the order, have managed the affair to suit their own sinister purposes. They made up a medley compounded of paganism, Judaism, and Christianity. Little of ancient Masonry is to be seen in it excepting the dress of the high priest, which is purely of pagan origin. And here it may be proper to remark that although it has been shown that the prayers of the ancient pagans and those of the Jews were couched in the same terms, the objects to whom they were addressed only being changed, nevertheless it may be doubted that the frequent introduction of texts of Scripture in the ceremonies is in strict conformity to original Masonry. 2 doctors of divinity, Desangeliers and Anderson, were engaged in the collection or forming anew of the ceremonies, and had it in their power to mould them at will. Whether innovations in this respect were made or not upon this occasion is of no consequence any farther than thereby to give an impression that Masonry might have some connection with the Jewish religion. These observations are therefore made to guard against such a conclusion. Knight of the Eagle and Sovereign Prince of Rose-Croix de Hérodin, This degree is a parody on the royal arch, and as such tends to confirm our interpretation of the purport of that chapter. Here the lost word is Jesus of Nazareth instead of Hiram. The time and circumstances attending the losing of the word are thus stated. The moment when the veil of the temple was rent, when darkness and consternation covered the earth, when the stars disappeared and the lamp of day was darkened, when the implements of masonry were lost and the cubic stones sweated blood and water, that was the moment when the great masonic word was lost. Nevertheless, says the Master, we will endeavor to recover it, and addressing the candidate for initiation says, "Are you disposed to follow us?" Answer: "Yes, I am, Master. Brother Wardens, make the candidate travel for 33 years to learn the beauties of the new law." The junior warden then conducts the candidate 33 times round the lodge without stopping. Bernard reduces the number to 7. The candidate is now conducted to the darkest of places from which the word must come forth triumphant to the glory and advantage of masonry. He is then ordered to parade the room 3 times in memory of the mysterious descent which lasted 3 days. After some further ceremony, the Master questions the candidate as follows: "From whence came you?" "From Judea." "Which way did you come?" "By Nazareth." "Who conducted you?" "Raphael." "Of what tribe are you descended?" "The tribe of Judah." "What do these 4 initial letters I and R signify?" "Jesus Nazarenus Rex Judaeorum." "Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews." "Master, my brethren, what happiness! The word is recovered. Give him the light." The veil is taken off, and all the brethren clap their hands 3 times and give 3 huzzas. The Master says to the candidate, "Approach, my brother, I will communicate to you our perfect mysteries. I congratulate you on the recovery of the word, which entitles you to this degree of perfect masonry. I shall make no comment or eulogium on it. Its sublimity will be duly appreciated by you. The impression which no doubt it has made on your mind will convince you that you were not deceived when you were informed that the ultimatum of Masonic perfection was to be acquired by this degree. It certainly will be a source of very considerable satisfaction to you that your merit alone has entitled you to it. The above is a mere sketch of this degree. Its scenery, some parts of which have already been noticed, is very imposing. In the representation of the infernal regions, the awful sights of the greater mysteries are more closely copied than is done in the Royal Arch. Whether the inventors of the order expected any serious effects to be produced by it, or whether it was got up for amusement and to show the ingenuity of its projectors, is uncertain. But it is pretty evident that such exhibitions, introduced amidst scenes of merriment and recreation, would not tend to make a very strong impression. Knight of Kadosh. Chapter of the Grand Inspectors of Lodges, Grand Elected Knights of Kadosh, or the White and Black Eagle. The chief is entitled Grand Commander. Although this degree is not recognized in ancient masonry, it has nevertheless such a decided astronomical bearing as to render it probable that it is derived from the Egyptian rites. I will therefore attempt to give an explication of its enigmatical allusions. When a reception into this degree is made, the Grand Commander remains alone in the chamber and must be so situated that the candidate cannot see him, as he is not to know who initiated him. A part of this obligation is that he never will declare to anyone who received him or assisted at his reception to this sublime degree. This is sheer affectation, and intended for no other purpose than to impress upon the candidate the awfulness of the mysteries in which he is about to be instructed. It is, however, an imitation of an ancient custom. Warburton says, "A passage in Eunapius seems to say that it was unlawful to reveal the name of the Hierophant, and Pythagoras, it has been seen, gave his lessons from behind a screen to his newly entered pupils. The saluting sign of Knights of Kadosh is to hold the sword in the left hand and place the right hand on the red cross which covers the heart. The question, 'Are you Kadosh?' is answered by placing the right hand on the forehead and saying, 'Yes, I am.' In the East, any person preferred to honors bore a scepter or staff of honor, and sometimes a plate of gold on the forehead called kadosh or caduceus, signifying a sacred person. See Supra. The mounting of what is called the mysterious ladder is the most distinguished ceremony in this degree. It is thus represented This ladder is an astronomical riddle founded on the progress of the sun through 7 signs of the zodiac, namely from Aries to Libra inclusive. In expounding this riddle, I shall avail myself of the solution by Dupuis of the fable of Hercules, one of the names of the sun, whose pretended labors are shown to be a mere allegory on the course of that luminary. Whether the names given to the steps of the ladder have a meaning in any language, or are here used arbitrarily, I know not. I give them as published by Bernard, with the significations annexed. Previously to the candidate's mounting the ladder, he is taught to pronounce the names of the 7 steps and is sworn to observe the injunctions pretended to be indicated thereby. After he has pronounced the last word in the 7th step, the Grand Commander says, "By the 7 conditions and by the power that is transmitted to me, which I have acquired by my discretion, my unwearied travels, zeal, favor, and constancy, I receive you, Grand Inspector of all lodges, Grand Elect Knight Templar, and to take rank among the Knights of Kadosh, or White and Black Eagle, which we bear the name of. I desire you not to forget it. It is indispensable for you, my brother, to mount the mysterious ladder, which you see there. It will serve to instruct you in the mysteries of our order, and it is absolutely necessary that you should have a true knowledge of it." The candidate then ascends the ladder. When he is on the 7th or highest step and has pronounced the 3 last words, the ladder is lowered and the candidate passes over it, because he cannot retire the same way, as he would in such case be obliged to go back, against which he has taken an obligation. He then reads the words at the bottom of the ladder, ne plus ultra. It has been the custom of the manufacturers of Masonic degrees to entitle the last, for the time being, the ne plus ultra, which being succeeded by others, the latter, like more of the last words of Mr. Basden, throw the former into the background. So the Grand Commander, in addressing the candidate, calls this order the last degree of Masonry. The attention, therefore, of the candidate, when arrived at the top of the ladder, is directed to the N plus ultra below. The candidate's retiring by a different way from that by which he ascended is in imitation of the course of the sun. The following fanciful description of the laws which govern the stellary system is given by Mackey, page 139. In the oblong zodiac of Tentira, each of the 12 signs is divided into 3 parts of 10 degrees, and each part is represented by a human figure with attributes expressive of his functions, called a decan, and each sign of the zodiac has 3 of these. The first of each was called a powerful leader of 3. To this company of 36 deacons, they attributed the management of the seasons. These were the powers whose functions were more durable than those of the 12 zodiacal constellations, which are still found to alter their position every 2,000 years relative to the season, and to move in that time through a space of 30 degrees from the equinoctial points. Not so the more powerful and constant gods, called the decans, or Elohim. Those of that rank which are fixed at the equator are still supposed to compel the sun to shine 12 hours a day all the world over, and those at the opposite parts of the equator constantly propel the sun the same way through their dominions. That is, those at the spring node will not suffer the sun to pass out of their palace the same way by which he entered, but order him to move on to the sign more northward. This is known to be the constant order of the sun, moon, and planets. First step of the mysterious ladder. The name designating the first step is Iskadaka, which is defined as righteousness. This, I apprehend, has an allusion to the sun in the vernal equinox, in the month of March, when the days and nights are equal all over the world, and when the sun, after having been long in the southern hemisphere, passes the line in order to dispense his favors equally to the north, which is doing justice to all agreeably to the above definition. Second step. The second step is Shor Iaban, white ox, figuratively. This is the only step, the definition of which is literally true, which, as it might lead to an interpretation of the meaning of the mysterious ladder, is thus falsely denominated figurative. Taurus, the bull, is the second sign of the zodiac, into which the sun enters on the 21st of April. His entry into this sign is marked by the setting of Orion, who, in mythological language, is said to be in love with the Pleiades, and by the rising of the latter. Third step. The third step is called Matteltok, sweetness. The third sign of the zodiac is Gemini, into which the sun enters in the mild, pleasant month of May. Canst thou hinder the sweet influences of Pleiades or loose the bands of Orion? Now the Pleiades were denominated by the Romans Virgilia, from their formerly rising when the spring commenced, and their sweet influences blessed the year by the beginning of spring, identity of the Hebrew and Druidical religions. Fourth step. The fourth step is Emuna, truth in disguise. The fourth sign is Cancer, into which the sun enters in the month of June. Egypt at this period is enveloped in clouds and dust, by which means the sun is obscured or disguised, and which figuratively may be denominated truth. Fifth step. The fifth step is Hamel Sagi, great labor, advancement to the practice of heaven. The fifth sign is Leo, or that of the celestial lion called the Lion of Nemea, under which the sun passes in July. The great labor and difficulties to which the sun was supposed to be subjected in passing this sign have before come under notice, which also is in perfect accord with the fable of the eminent exploit of Hercules in killing the lion of Nemea. The sun, when in the sign Leo, is on his advance towards the equator, where the ancients supposed heaven to be situated. Sixth step. The sixth step is Sabal, a burden or patience. The sixth sign through which the sun passes is Virgo, marked by the total disappearance of the celestial hydra, called the Hydra of Lerna, from whose head springs up the great dog and the crab. Hercules destroys the Hydra of Lerna, but is annoyed in his operation by a sea crab which bit him in the foot. Apollodorus says that whenever Hercules lopped off one of the monster's heads, two others sprang up in the place of it, so that this labor would have been endless had he not ordered his companion Iolaus to sear the blood with fire and thereby put a stop to their reproduction, and thus was that event actually represented in a fine picture in the Temple of Delphi. Seventh step. The seventh step is named Gemula, Biwa, Tebuna, retribution, intelligence, prudence. The seventh sign is Libra, into which the sun enters at the commencement of autumn, indicated by the rising of the celestial centaur, the same that treated Hercules with hospitality. This constellation is represented in the heavens with a flask full of wine and a thyrsus, ornamented with branches of leaves and grapes, the symbol of the productions of the season. The sun has now arrived at the autumnal equinox, bringing in his train the fruits of the earth, and retribution is made to the husbandman in proportion to his intelligence and prudence. The allegory is certainly beautiful, and the mysterious ladder is well worthy to be called the ne plus ultra of Masonry. Since preparing the above, my attention has been drawn to a learned article on the same subject in a work before noticed by the Reverend G. Oliver, which confirms my conjecture that the ladder composed a part of the machinery of the mysteries and consequently has a legitimate standing in Masonry. It probably constituted a component part of the Royal Arch degree, illustrating the 7 steps required to consummate that exalted grade. The following is a sketch of this article. The ladder with 7 steps was used in the Indian mysteries to designate the approach of the soul to perfection. The steps were usually denominated gates. The meaning is undoubtedly the same, for it is observable that Jacob, in referring to the lower stave of his ladder, exclaimed, "This is the house of God and the gate of heaven." Here we find the notion of ascending to heaven by means of the practice of moral virtue depicted by the Hebrew patriarchs and by a remote idolatrous nation under the idea of a ladder. These gates were said to be composed of different metals of gradually increasing purity. The uppermost stave, which constituted the summit of perfection and opened a way to the residence of the celestial deities, was composed of the pure and imperishable substance of gold, and was under the protection of their most high God, the sun. The ascent to the summit of the paradisiacal Mount of God by means of a pyramid consisting of 7 steps was an old notion, certainly entertained before the vision of Jacob, for it prevailed amongst the Mexican savages, and the original settlers on the vast continent of America could have no knowledge of this vision, either by tradition or personal experience. In these mysteries, during the ceremony of initiation, the candidate was passed successively through 7 dark and winding caverns, which progress was mystically denominated the ascent of the ladder. Each cavern terminated in a narrow stone orifice, which formed an entrance into its successor. Through these gates of purification, the mortified aspirant was compelled to squeeze his body with considerable labor. And when he had attained the summit, he was said to have passed through the transmigration of the spheres, to have accomplished the ascent of the soul, and to merit the favor of the celestial deities. In the Persian mysteries, the candidate, by a similar process, was passed through 7 spacious caverns, connected by winding passages, each opening with a narrow portal and each the scene of some perilous adventure, to try his courage and fortitude before he was admitted into the splendid cecellum, which, being illuminated with 1,000 torches, reflected every shade of color, from rich gems and amulets, with which the walls were copiously bedecked. The dangerous progress was denominated ascending the ladder of perfection. From this doctrine has arisen the tale of Rustam, who was the Persian Hercules, and Dive-Sepid, or the White Giant. Kaikous, the successor of Kai Kobab, the first monarch of the Kayanian dynasty, is instigated by the song of a minstrel to attempt the conquest of Mazandaran, which is celebrated as a perfect earthly paradise. This celestial abode refers to the splendid cecellum of the Persian epopla, which was an emblematical representation of heaven. Kaikous fails in his enterprise, for the sacred country is guarded by the White Giant, who smites him and all his troop with blindness and makes them his prisoners. This is a literal account of the first stage of initiation, which in the mysteries always commences with darkness. In those of Britain, the candidate is designated as a blind man. And the captivity of Kaikous and his Persians in the cavern under the rigid guardianship of the Dive is but a figurative representation of the candidate's enclosure under the pastos. And this place of penance in the Celtic mysteries, which had many ceremonies in common with those of Persia, was said to be guarded by the gigantic deity Buanaur, armed with a drawn sword, who is represented as a most powerful and vindictive being, capable in his fury of making heaven, earth, and hell to tremble. In the Gothic mysteries, the same place of captivity and penance is fabled to be guarded by Heimdall, whose trumpet emits so loud a blast that the sound is heard through all the worlds. In this emergency, the king sends a messenger to Zoel, the father of the hero Rustam, begging his immediate assistance. For the greater dispatch, Rustam takes the shorter though more dangerous road and departs alone, mounted on his charger Rakesh. Here Rustam enters upon the dreadful and dangerous business of initiation, mounted, says the legend, upon the charger Rakesh, or more properly Rakshi. This was a horrible winged animal whose common food is said to have been serpents and dragons. Now these reptiles, together with monsters compounded of 2 or more animals, were the ordinary machinery used in the mysteries to prove the courage and fortitude of the aspirant during his progress through the 7 stages of regeneration. The course which he chooses is styled the Road of the 7 Stages, and at each of the first 6 he meets with a different adventure by which his persevering courage is severely tried. At each of the 7 stages the candidate really encountered many dangers, and vanquished a multitude of dives, dragons, and enchanters, who in succession opposed his progress to perfection. Being pantomimically enacted during the process of initiation and the reiterated attacks prosecuted with unrelenting severity, instances have occurred where the poor affrighted wretch has absolutely expired through excess of fear. Having at length, however, fought his way to the 7th, he discovers his prince and the captive Persians, when he learns from Kaikous that nothing will restore his sight but the application of 3 drops of blood from the heart of the White Giant. The symbolical 3 drops of blood had its counterpart in all the mysteries of the ancient world, for the number 3 was inviolable and the conservator of many virtues. In Britain, the emblem was 3 drops of water. In Mexico, as in this legend, 3 drops of blood. In India, it was a belt composed of 3 triple threads. In China, the 3 strokes of the letter Y, etc. Upon this, he attacks his formidable enemy in the cavern where he was accustomed to dwell, and having torn out his heart, after an obstinate combat, he infuses the prescribed 3 drops into the eyes of Kaikous, who immediately regains his powers of vision. In this tale we have the theological ladder connected with the system of Persian initiation transferred from mythology to romance, and the coincidence is sufficiently striking to impress the most ordinary observer with the strict propriety of the application. The candidate comes off conqueror and is regularly restored to light after having given full proof of his courage and fortitude by surmounting all opposing dangers. Father Angelo, who went out as a missionary into the East about 1663, says that in the midst of a vast plain between Shiraz and Schuster, he saw a quadrangular monument of stupendous size which was said to have been erected in memory of this great enterprise of the hero Rustam. The fact is that this quadrangular enclosure was an ancient place of initiation, and from a confused remembrance of the scenes of mimic adventure which were represented within its 7 secret caverns, the fabulous labors of Rustam had doubtless their origin. Here the author has evidently mistaken the copy for the archetype. The scenes of mimic adventure alluded to undoubtedly originated from the fabulous labors of Rustam, the Persian Hercules. It has been shown that Hercules was one of the names by which the sun was designated, and that the perilous adventures attributed to a fabulous character to whom the name was given was a mere allegory on the progress of that luminary through the signs of the zodiac, of which the tale of Rustam is another version. Osiris, Bacchus, Cronus, Pluto, and Hercules are all equally the sun. The Order of Noachites, or Chevalier Prussian. This order, there is reason to believe, was instituted by the ancient Prussians. It claims priority over that of the Freemasons of England. The author of an exposé of the ritual of that institution, which will be noticed below, gives just 53 years between the periods of the 2 establishments and says, "This tradition is firmly believed." In corroboration of this fact, Dr. Anderson observes, "The first name of Masons, according to some old traditions, was Noachites. The ceremonies of the Noachites seem to have served in some measure as a model upon which those of Freemasonry are founded." Although the scene of the establishment of this order is laid at the Tower of Babel, instead of the Temple of Solomon, the craft of Masonry, as in the Freemason Society, is made use of to cover the real design of the institution, the maintaining of religious dogmas, if not the recovery of independence. The following remarks in Guthrie's sketch of the history of ancient Prussia and Poland will tend to show at what time this institution was probably formed. Speaking of Poland, he says, "From this period, 830 for some centuries, we have no very certain records of the history of Poland. The title of Duke was retained till the year 999, when Boleslaus I assumed the title of King and conquered Moravia, Prussia, and Bohemia, making them tributary to Poland." Of Prussia. The ancient history of Prussia, like that of other kingdoms, is lost in the clouds of fiction and romance. The inhabitants appear to have been a brave and warlike people. They were descended from the Sclavonians and refused to submit to the neighboring princes who, on pretense of converting them to Christianity, wanted to reduce them to slavery. They made a noble stand against the kings of Poland, one of whom, Boleslaus IV, they defeated and killed in 1163. They continued pagans till the time of the latter Crusades, about the year 1227. From the foregoing statements, it appears that the sway of Poland over Prussia obtained in 999 was not of long duration, and it is reasonable to conjecture that soon after the conquest, the people of Prussia established the Order of Noachites. It was evidently a military institution and undoubtedly intended as a rallying point to operate as occasions might occur for the recovery of the civil and religious liberties of the nation. Admitting that the Society of Noachites was founded in the year 1000, which is highly probable, and provided the foregoing tradition be correct, the establishment of Freemasonry in England would have occurred about the middle of the 11th century, which is as late as it is likely to have been neglected after the Edict of Canute prohibiting the open worship of the Druids. Bernard, in his account of this order, says, "The Grand Master, General of the Order, whose title is Chevalier Grand Commander, is Frederick William, King of Prussia. His ancestors for 300 years have been protectors of this order. The knights were formerly known by the name of Noachites. The Noachites, now called Prussian Chevaliers, are descended from Peleg, the grand architect of the Tower of Babel, their origin being more ancient than that of the Masons descended from Hiram. The knights assemble on the night of the full moon in the month of March, the vernal equinox, in a secret place, to hold their lodges, and they cannot initiate a candidate into the mysteries of this order unless by the light of the moon. Great innovations have been introduced into the ceremonies of this order. I have a copy of its ritual, which, from its antiquity and Druidical style, may be presumed genuine. It was reprinted from a London copy by John Holt, New York, 1768. As a curiosity and as bearing a relationship to the ancient mysteries, I will give an abstract of it. The order consists of 2 degrees called minor and major, and the officers form what masonically may be termed a chapter, to which the other members are not admitted. This chapter comports with the royal arch of Freemasonry, for here the secret word Belus is revealed, which the reader is aware is the same as Osiris personated by Hiram. The expounder of the order appears to have committed an error in giving this word at the opening of the minor's degree, because it is expressly said afterwards that it was unknown to all but officers. Minor's degree. Examiner. When did Masonry begin? Respondent. About 154 years after Noah's flood, at the building of Babel's Tower. Who was Grand Master there? Nimrod, called by Masons Belus, not Peleg as modern Masons have it. Nimrod, which signifies a rebel in the Jewish and Chaldean language, was the name given him by Moses, but in Chaldea he was called Belus, which signified Lord, and afterwards was worshipped as a god by many nations under the name of Bel or Baal, and became the Bacchus of the ancients, or Bar-Chus, the son of Chus. Where was the first lodge held? In a pleasant plain of Babylon called Shinar, on the banks of the river Tigris. In what manner were you made? I was led to a door where a man stood with a drawn sword in his hand, who asked my friend what he wanted. What did your friend reply? To have me made a mason. Did he admit you? Yes, he struck the door with his sword, upon which it instantly flew open. My friend then led me by the hand into a very dark room, and then the door was shut. What succeeded this? My friend then said with a loud voice, "Here stands a candidate for masonry who fain would know our art and mystery. Show him the light by which we work, and then perhaps he'll learn the art, like other men." Upon this, a door flew open and discovered a room extremely light, out of which came 3 men with drawn swords, one of whom said, "Deliver your friend to us." Upon this, my friend delivered me into their care, and I was ushered into the lodge, one walking before and one on each side, and my friend in the rear. Thus was I brought out of darkness into light. What was done after this? I was stripped naked, in order that all the lodge might be well assured they were not imposed upon by a woman. This is a sheer hoax upon the order. The real intention, as in the mysteries and Freemasonry, is to represent man in a state of nature before the arts, and particularly that of making clothing, were invented. The candidate before initiation is looked upon as an uncultivated savage. The initiation civilizes and regenerates him. What was then done? The master clothed me with the badge of innocence. This is a loose white garment, generally made of fine linen and sometimes of silk. He then took me by the right hand and placed me in the center of the brethren. He then ordered me to kneel down on both my knees and held to my throat the point of a sword which he had in his hand, and then addressed me as follows. "Sir, you are now going to be admitted a member of this ancient and honorable fraternity, and it is expected that you will lay yourself under the subsequent obligation. You shall not reveal to any person or persons, either by word of mouth or your own handwriting, or cause to be revealed in any manner whatever, any part or parts, point or points, or any traditions which have been, are now, or shall hereafter be held as a secret among Masons, unless to an honest man who you know is a Mason, or to the master or wardens of any regular lodge. And as it was always esteemed by the Masons of old that to swear by the sword was the most binding of all obligations, so we do insist and require you solemnly to kiss the edge of this sword presented to your throat, as a signification of your full consent to and approbation of the above particulars. Your well-performing this injunction will make you ever esteemed by this venerable body, as the contrary will render you guilty of a breach of the most sacred band of human society, and consequently degrade you from the character of a man of honor, which every Mason ought to preserve more carefully than his life." The Freemasons, at the revival of the order in 1717, would have done well to have adopted this oath instead of those of Hiram Masonry. Are you desirous of knowing the Major's secrets? Yes, your good behavior alone will not obtain them. By that alone they could not be obtained, but I, by that, a golden signet which will admit me into that degree, that I may work among the majors free. What is that signet? A ring. Produce it. Behold it here, showing the ring. Attend, my brethren, all that round me stand, while I obey great Belus's dread command. Our brother here, upon examination, desires I'll place him in a higher station. A miner's character as well maintained, and answered all things well, by which he's gained the signet rare, which Belus did ordain, for such as could the miner's art attain, that they may to the tower repair, and be received to work among the majors free. 'Tis then my will and pleasure that he may begin to work and enter into pay. Ceremony of installment of officers. Where were you installed? In the observatory. How high was it? On the top of the tower? How got you there? By a winding ascent. In what manner were you installed? I first passed the miner's examination and then the major's. After which Belus informed me the brethren had unanimously agreed to elect me into the office, of which he invested me with the badge. Have the officers a secret word? Yes. How did you receive it? On my 2 knees he ordered me to kneel before he could the secret word reveal, a word to all but officers unknown, because we give it when we are alone. The word is Belus, be it known to thee. 'Twas that great man gave birth to Masonry. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe and comment, and if you can please consider donating to Wars of the Roses. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.